Chapter 17. What felt like barely 15 minutes after he'd gone to bed, Harry was jolted awake by the chime of Ron's alarm clock and a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Weasley crept inside, her smile widening when she saw Harry blinking himself awake. "Time to get up, dear," she whispered, moving to shake Ron, who was still soundly asleep despite the alarm blaring. At the foot of Harry's bed, two indistinct shapes shuffled around. He reached for his glasses and soon saw the twins sit up with identical groggy stretches, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Even the sun hadn't risen yet. They dressed in silence, too sleepy for conversation, and shuffled down the stairs to the kitchen. "Where are the others?" Ron asked through a yawn. Mr. Weasley looked up from the table. "The girls will be down in a minute. The other boys are old enough to apparate, so they get a bit of a lie-in." He stood up, holding his arms out with a grin. "What do you think? Do I look like a muggle? We're supposed to go incognito." He was wearing a golf jumper and a pair of baggy jeans that looked older than Harry. "Very good," Harry approved, grinning back. Just then, Hermione and Ginny stumbled in, slumping into chairs as Mrs. Weasley began ladling out porridge for everyone. Mr. Weasley sat back down, shuffling through some pieces of parchment, likely counting their tickets. "Eat up, we've got a bit of a walk," Mr. Weasley said, tucking the tickets into his pocket. Ginny looked up at him blearily. "Walk?" she repeated, unimpressed. "To the portkey," Mr. Weasley explained. "With so many people going to the same place, they could only set out a certain number of portkeys. That's why we're up so early, I'm afraid." He added this last part for Harry and Hermione, scheduled departure time and all. "I've done worse for airport runs," Hermione assured him, rubbing at her eyes. Mr. Weasley's eyes lit up. "I've always wondered what that was like, flying on an airplane," he started. "George," Mrs. Weasley said sharply, making them all jump. It was far too early for sudden loud noises. "What is that in your pockets?" "Nothing," George replied too quickly. Mrs. Weasley scowled, and with a swift summoning charm, several brightly coloured objects zoomed into her outstretched hand. Harry braced himself for the coming tirade, noticing Ron doing the same across the table. More charms sent sweets flying from unexpected places, including the turn-ups of Fred's jeans, while Mrs. Weasley yelled at them all the while. If Harry had known they were trying to smuggle treats out of the house, he would have offered his help. After a somewhat frosty goodbye from Mrs. Weasley, they set off across the grass under the moonlight. Harry quickened his pace to walk beside Mr. Weasley. "So, where's this portkey leaving from?" he asked. He had never used a portkey before, but Remus had taught him about them over the summer. "Stoat's Head Hill," Mr. Weasley replied, pointing to the landmass rising before them. "There are about 200 portkeys all over Britain for this, and this is our nearest." Climbing Stoat's Head Hill was challenging at the best of times, but in the dark it felt like a minefield of rabbit holes and unexpected rocks. By the time they reached the top, all of them were breathless and a little sweaty. Harry spotted two silhouettes on the hilltop. "Over here, Arthur." "Amos!" Mr. Weasley greeted brightly, striding toward the pair and shaking the taller one's hand warmly. As they got closer, Harry recognized the other figure as Cedric Diggory, his brown hair windswept and his cheeks flushed. "Kids, this is Amos Diggory, and I believe you know his son." "Hi, Cedric," Harry said cheerfully, once it became clear the twins weren't going to say anything. The rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team still held a grudge against Cedric for last year's match. Cedric, the Hufflepuff seeker from last year's match, greeted Harry with a friendly wave. "Hiya, Harry. Hi, everyone," he said, prompting soft giggles from Hermione and Ginny. Harry had noticed that reaction was common around Cedric Diggory. He couldn't blame them. Cedric was undeniably handsome. "Long walk, Arthur?" Amos asked, his tone friendly. "We had to get up at 2. I'll be glad when he gets his apparition license, I swear. I can't side along to save my life. I'd splinch us both," Mr. Weasley replied. "Only a month away, Dad," Cedric chimed in supportively. Amos chuckled. "It's all right, lad. It's worth it for this. Blimey, Arthur," he added, glancing around at the crowd. "Don't tell me all these are yours." "Oh no, only the redheads," Mr. Weasley assured him. "Harry and Hermione are Ron's friends, but I've got 3 more old enough to apparate themselves." Amos's gaze shifted to Harry, and Harry braced himself as he noticed the man's eyes flick to his forehead. "Merlin's beard! Harry Potter!" Amos exclaimed, his eyes widening. "Ced's told me all about you, of course. I said to him, 'Ced, that'll be something to tell your grandchildren. You beat Harry Potter at Quidditch.'" Cedric winced, shooting Harry an apologetic glance. "I told you, Dad, they were Dementors. It wasn't a fair match." "Oh, you Hufflepuffs," Amos dismissed with a laugh, clapping his son on the shoulder. "It doesn't take a genius to see who's the better flyer when one man falls off his broom and the other stays on. Eh, Harry?" Harry replied evenly, "I mean, if you'd like to try playing Quidditch while listening to your mother's screams as she's murdered in front of you, by all means, be my guest." The humour in the air shifted, taking the wind out of Amos's sails. After several long, awkward seconds of silence, Mr. Weasley cleared his throat. "Do you know if we're waiting for anyone else, Amos? It must be nearly time." No, it's just us," Amos replied, his tone somewhat stiff. "Then we'd best get ready. Gather round, everyone." The portkey turned out to be an old boot, and it took a moment for all 9 of them to arrange themselves in a tight circle, each with a hand on the boot. They stood there as the sun began to rise, with Mr. Weasley offering a countdown. Suddenly, Harry felt as if a hook was yanking him from his navel, and in an instant his feet left the ground. Ron and Hermione slammed into him from either side as they shot upward in a whirlwind of colour and wind. The journey ended abruptly, with Harry's feet crashing back down to the earth. He almost managed to keep his balance until Ron staggered into him, sending him tumbling to the ground. Cedric extended a hand to help him up, a sheepish grin on his face. "Easy there, Harry." He brushed some dirt off Harry's arm. "Look, I'm sorry about my dad," he said quietly. "I've tried talking to him, but he's just—" "It's fine," Harry insisted, "really. He's proud of you. It's nice." Cedric gave a half grimace. "Are we still on for that rematch?" he asked. Harry nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. See you later, yeah?" He realized they were parting ways. "Enjoy the match." He waved Cedric off, but as soon as they turned away, he found himself surrounded by a Weasley twin on either side. "You're getting awfully cozy with Diggory there, Harry," Fred teased. It took Harry a moment to grasp what he meant, and he felt his face heat up. "We're friends. He's a nice guy. He feels really bad about the match. You should ease up on him." George raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Still, Bill's better looking." Harry spluttered, realizing they had noticed his blush. He quickly covered his face with his hands. Mortified. "Don't worry about it, Harry," Fred said, nudging him in the ribs with a grin. "Our big brother's very fanciable." He wiggled his eyebrows playfully. "A bit old for you, mind, but whatever makes you happy." "I don't fancy your brother," Harry hissed in an aggressive whisper, certain he'd never been redder in his life. He glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "I don't," he insisted again. The twins exchanged skeptical looks. "Sure," they said in sarcastic unison. Harry glared at them. He didn't even like boys like that. Well, maybe that was a bit of a lie. Bill was really attractive, but that didn't mean Harry fancied him. He could think someone was good-looking without having a crush. Besides, he much preferred blondes. His cheeks burned when he realized what he had just thought. Where had that come from? Either way, he wasn't interested in Bill Weasley. He was practically family. "What are you three whispering about back there?" Ron asked suspiciously as Mr. Weasley finished paying the Muggle campsite manager and headed off into the field. "None of your business," the twins retorted cheerfully. Ron scowled at them. Harry could hardly believe some of the tents they walked past, each one more elaborate than the last. Wizards were ridiculous. The tents Mr. Weasley had borrowed looked much more ordinary, and when Harry and Hermione stepped inside, they shared a wide-eyed glance at the surprising space. "I love magic," Harry muttered, and Hermione giggled, nodding in agreement. Soon, Harry, Ron and Hermione were sent off to find water. Harry wasn't sure why they couldn't just conjure some, but Mr. Weasley seemed determined to embrace the Muggle camping experience as much as possible. It was still pretty early, so there weren't many people up yet, but the more they walked, the more the campground began to come to life. Harry spotted several familiar faces. It looked like half of Hogwarts had managed to get tickets. While Ron and Hermione chatted with Seamus and Dean, Harry spotted Ernie Macmillan and waved cheerfully as he jogged over to the stocky Hufflepuff. "Hi, Ernie. How's your summer been?" Harry asked, as if he hadn't been regularly owling him. "Oh, you know, not bad," Ernie replied. "Good to hear. Mine's been great," Harry said. "I learned a bit about my family and got to know some new friends better," he added vaguely. Ernie's smile widened. "Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. I've got to run, but let's catch up properly at school, okay?" Harry nodded, letting Ernie continue on his way. He hurried back to Ron and Hermione, who were just wrapping up their conversation. "Who are you talking to, Harry?" Ron asked as they walked. "Just some people from school." "Oh, look, there's the tap," Harry said, pointing ahead. On their way back, Harry was nearly knocked over when Oliver Wood jumped onto his back, ruffling his hair and pulling him towards his tent to introduce him to his parents. "Charlie told me the news, by the way." "That's amazing, Oliver. Congratulations," Harry exclaimed. Oliver glowed with pride. "Thanks, Harry. You'll have to come to a match once the season starts back up." Just then, a familiar head popped out of the tent beside Oliver's family. "Oliver, I swear, are you going on about Puddlemere again?" He looked up and blinked at the sight of Harry. "Potter!" It was Cassius Warrington, one of Harry's tentative new allies. "Warrington," Harry greeted neutrally, unsure of how to interact with the older boy in public, even though they'd been writing all summer. He glanced between the two. "Are you two friends or something?" he asked, surprised they seemed to know each other beyond their Quidditch rivalry. The pair shared a quick look before glancing away. "Nah, just coincidence," Oliver said, waving it off. "Randomly assigned campsites, you know. Anyway, I don't want to keep you too long. Write to me when you're back at school, all right? I want to know how the new keeper turns out." Harry said goodbye to the two of them, still feeling a bit bemused. Eventually, they made it back to their campsite, which had gained a few more members. The three eldest Weasley brothers had arrived, and Bill and Charlie seemed to have drawn quite a crowd. "You guys took ages," Fred complained, snatching the water from Ron. "Met a few people," Ron replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Dad still hasn't got the fire going." "He's having fun with matches," George said, gesturing towards their father, who was surrounded by a pile of spent matchsticks. Hermione let out a fond sigh. "I'll help," she said, sitting down beside him and gently taking the matchbox. Harry left her to it and wandered over to the group gathered around Bill and Charlie. He didn't recognize any of them. Presumably they were friends from Hogwarts. "All right, Harry," Charlie greeted him warmly, beckoning him closer. "We're having a bit of a reunion. Harry, this is everyone. Everyone, this is Harry Potter." "I thought you were joking when you said you knew Harry Potter," a blond man exclaimed, quickly covering his mouth. Charlie chuckled. "Nah, he's mates with all the younger ones," he explained, gesturing to his scattered siblings. "Mum's basically adopted him," Bill added, giving Harry a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Don't mind Andre, Harry. He gets a bit starstruck." "Watcha, Harry," a woman with a bright green pixie cut called out, waving at him. "I'm Tonks." That sparked a round of introductions, though Harry could only remember about 3 names. The conversation quickly shifted to stories about people and events he didn't know, as they reminisced about their old Hogwarts days. Feeling a bit out of place, Harry discreetly excused himself from the group. Harry made his way over to where Mr. Weasley had started the fire. Bill and Charlie's friends didn't linger for long. They all had other commitments. Soon, the 2 eldest Weasley brothers rejoined their family just in time for lunch, while Mr. Weasley kept up a lively commentary about the people passing by. Percy emerged from the tent, drawn by the delicious smell of food, grumbling about the mountain of work still ahead of him. They were soon joined by Ludo Bagman, followed by Barty Crouch. Harry was surprised to discover just how many friends Mr. Weasley had at the Ministry. As the conversations flowed around him, Harry tried to remain in the background, listening with interest but avoiding the spotlight. After spending the summer with only 3 people who didn't care about his fame or his scar, it felt exhausting to deal with the constant attention that came with being Harry Potter. Percy dropped several hints about what was in store at Hogwarts this year, reveling in his knowledge while his younger siblings looked on, clueless. Harry couldn't help but hide a smile, pretending to be just as unaware as they were. They would find out soon enough. Finally, it was time to head to the match. Harry was surprised to learn they would be seated in the top box, making him wonder what kind of favours Mr. Weasley had called in, and how often he had mentioned that Harry Potter would be joining them. The thought unsettled him. While he was thrilled to attend the Quidditch World Cup with the Weasleys, the idea that someone he trusted was using his name to gain advantages without his permission made him feel a bit queasy. Shaking off the thought, Harry resolved not to let anything spoil his enjoyment of the day, even Ron's complaints about not having enough money for souvenirs. He was at the final of the Quidditch World Cup, and nothing was going to bring him down. The match was incredible. It got off to a rocky start in the top box when Minister Fudge arrived and immediately began showcasing Harry to the Bulgarian minister as if he were some sort of national landmark. Harry's name had certainly played a role in securing those coveted top box tickets. Then the Malfoys showed up, and Ron couldn't help but start making snide remarks about Draco. Harry, who had felt a flicker of excitement at seeing the blonde, settled for making pointed eye contact with both Draco and Narcissa, while glaring at Lucius Malfoy as he quietly mocked Mr. Weasley. Fortunately, Bagman arrived and quickly kicked off the festivities, and from that moment on, it was nothing short of fantastic. Unlike most of the other boys, Harry didn't get starry-eyed over the vela. He noticed that Draco didn't either, maintaining a look of mild amusement in his seat. Ron, on the other hand, was ready to leap off the edge of the box until Hermione yanked him back by his collar. Once the match began, Harry wouldn't have noticed if the entire stadium was filled with vela. He kept the omnioculars pressed to his face for most of the match, watching eagerly as the players zoomed around the pitch, passing at breakneck speeds. The Irish chasers were a formidable force, but it was Victor Crumb who captivated Harry's attention. The man's flying was nothing short of incredible. When the Seekers made it up to the top box for the award ceremony, they looked a right mess. Harry watched the players in awe, wondering how one went about becoming a professional Quidditch player. That would be a pretty cool career. As they headed back to their tents, the entire campground was alive with celebration. Even the tents, draped in Bulgarian red and black, seemed to join in the fun, celebrating a well-caught snitch. The Weasley family celebration was a bit more subdued, but Charlie still managed to pull a crate of butterbeer from somewhere, along with a bottle of fire whiskey for the adults. The twins attempted to sneak some, but Bill, familiar with his brother's tricks, hexed them so their fingers were stuck together at the tips. The atmosphere shifted when Ginny fell asleep at the table, knocking over her hot chocolate. That was when Mr. Weasley declared it bedtime, sending the girls off to their tent. As Harry settled in, he wondered how his classmates were celebrating. Were there groups of Hogwarts students somewhere, cheering and singing under the fireworks-strewn sky? He was surprised that the older Weasley boys weren't off celebrating with their friends, but he figured they didn't see their younger siblings often. He appreciated the extra company. Bill and Charlie were just like the twins, and it was a lot of fun having them around. Harry crawled into bed with a yawn, only to bolt upright moments later as an ear-splitting scream pierced the night. That was definitely not a scream of joy. He and Ron rushed into the living room, where the other boys stood, looking alarmed. "What was that?" Percy asked cautiously. More screams echoed through the air, sounding like huge groups of people were running. Mr. Weasley hurried back into the tent, his face pale in the dim light. "Death Eaters," he declared grimly. The eldest three Weasleys cursed. Harry felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "Are you sure?" Bill asked urgently, already grabbing his wand. Charlie and Percy followed suit. "Positive. Kids, hurry, grab your jackets and get outside now. I'm going to get the girls." With that, Mr. Weasley dashed out again. Harry quickly grabbed his jacket and boots, double-checking that his wand was secure in its holster. He, Ron, and the twins sprinted outside the tent, skidding to a halt at the sight of chaos unfolding before them. People were fleeing from a group in robes and masks, spells flashing as drunken jeers echoed behind the terrified screams. Above the masked group was, oh God, the Muggle who ran the campground, along with his family. Wizards were levitating a woman high in the air, flipping her over and laughing as her nightdress rode up. Hermione and Ginny emerged from their tents, horror etched across their faces. A moment later, the three eldest Weasley boys stepped out, fully dressed with their wands at the ready, sleeves rolled up. "We're going to help the Ministry," Mr. Weasley shouted over the chaos. "You lot get into the woods and stick together. I'll come fetch you when it's safe. Fred, George, look after your sister." He received two serious nods before dashing off with his eldest sons towards the turmoil. Fred grabbed Ginny by the hand, pulling her towards the woods. They all sprinted for safety, merging with the throngs of fleeing people. The rest of the night became a blur. Within minutes they lost track of Ginny and the twins, but Harry trusted that Fred and George would keep her safe. He and Hermione moved to light the way, when Ron suddenly realized his wand was missing. "I have to go back and look for it," he insisted. "Mum and Dad will kill me if they have to get me another one." He started walking against the tide of people, and Hermione shot Harry a look filled with a mix of fear and exasperation. "Ronald!" she called, hurrying after him. Harry started to follow, but a flash of blonde caught his eye. "Malfoy!" he called, aware of the public setting. Draco, leaning against a tree and watching the chaos unfold through a gap in the woods, turned to him with raised eyebrows. "Potter, don't tell me you're out here alone." There was a hint of concern in his voice. Harry stepped closer, keeping an eye out for his friends. "Ron and Hermione are back there. Ron lost his wand." "Idiot," Draco muttered, shaking his head. "Are you all right?" Harry met his gaze, seeing past Draco's unaffected facade to the worry lurking in his grey eyes. "Where's your mother?" Draco's lip quivered. "Father insisted she stay by his side." Harry's heart raced as understanding washed over him. He stared at Draco in disbelief. They're not." Draco nodded grimly. His parents were out there, masked and wreaking havoc among muggles, all in service of Voldemort. "He wouldn't take no for an answer. The only reason he let me go is that I'm underage." Without thinking about who might see them, Harry reached out and grasped Draco's hand tightly. "She'll be okay," he said, wishing he could truly promise that. Draco glanced down at their intertwined fingers before meeting Harry's gaze again. "She's been through this before. She knows how to blend in with a group like that. She'll be fine." Slowly, Draco nodded, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby, followed by a muffled cry. "Ron." Harry quickly released Draco's hand and stepped back. "You all right there, Ron?" he called out. "There you are, Harry. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tripped on a root. No sign of my wand." "With feet that big, I'm not surprised," Draco remarked coolly, his Ice Prince demeanor returning. Harry felt a pang in his chest at the familiar taunt. "Malfoy," Ron growled, glaring at him. "What are you doing here?" Harry intervened, trying to diffuse the tension before it escalated into a fight. He ushered Hermione deeper into the woods, urging Ron to ignore Draco. "You don't even have your wand. You can't hex him," he pointed out. "Yeah, but you could," Ron shot back. "Merlin, Mum's going to be furious if I can't find it." "I'm sure it's back in the tent," Hermione chimed in, though her tone was uncertain. They continued walking, scanning the trees for the twins and Ginny, nearly losing Ron to a trio of Veela they encountered. When they reached a small clearing, Harry suggested they stop and wait. That's when everything took a turn for the worse. He found himself staring in horror at the massive skull and snake hovering in the air before them. The sky was dark, marked by the ominous dark mark looming above them. They barely took a few steps before being surrounded by Ministry wizards, who unleashed a barrage of stunning spells. Harry instinctively gripped his wand as he got to his feet, though he quickly realized there was no need. Mr. Weasley was charging through the crowd, shouting for the wizards to leave them alone. What followed was a chaotic and disastrous attempt at an investigation, one that Harry would rather forget. In the back of his mind, he could almost hear a voice that sounded like Snape's, berating everyone as dunderheads and imbeciles. The wizards accused 3 teenagers, one of whom was Harry Potter, of conjuring Voldemort's symbol, along with Mr. Crouch's house elf. Harry's heart sank for the poor elf he had seen earlier in the top box, watching her sob as her master dismissed her. Sirius had once explained house elves to him when he inquired about Kerry. They needed to be bonded to a household, or their magic would falter and make them ill. If they remained free for too long, they would die. Harry wished he had known that when he freed Dobby. But then again, he doubted that whatever fate awaited a free elf could be worse than serving Lucius Malfoy. Ron's wand being used to cast the mark didn't help their case, but eventually they managed to sort everything out and return to their tents. Fortunately, the rest of the Weasley family was there, mostly unharmed. Bill had a cut across his cheek, and Percy's right sleeve was slightly charred, but they were otherwise fine. Ginny looked pale, tucked close to Charlie's side. They gathered in the larger tent, with no one willing to send the girls back to bed after the ordeal they had just faced. The trio shared their harrowing experience, and Ron asked about the dark mark, confused about why it was such a big deal. Harry listened in silence as Mr. Weasley explained, but he found it hard to feign ignorance, especially with all the memories of Snape flooding back. Remus had taught Harry over the summer about Voldemort's first rise and the troubling implications of Snape's dark mark hurting again. Mr. Weasley shot Harry a puzzled look when he failed to react to Bill's comment about the crowd being Death Eaters who had lied to avoid Azkaban. Harry masked his unease with a yawn, hoping Mr. Weasley would assume he was simply tired after such a long day. They were all sent to bed shortly after, but Harry lay awake for a while, listening to Charlie's soft snores. He wished for a little more privacy in the tent. He had the two-way mirror in his bag and was desperate to talk to Sirius about what had happened. Surely Sirius would find out from the prophet in the morning if Snape hadn't already told him. Had Snape been part of the group to maintain his cover? Anxiety twisted in Harry's stomach as he squeezed his eyes shut, imagining Remus staying up late, worried about Sirius, and Sirius pacing the living room, demanding to check on Harry. He promised himself he would call them in the morning, as soon as he could find a moment to himself. They had only managed a few hours of sleep when Mr. Weasley woke them all up. Soon they were packed and trudging back to the crowded Portkey departure point. Mrs. Weasley was waiting anxiously when they returned, rushing forward to meet them at the garden gate. She threw herself into her husband's arms, then hugged each of her children in turn, and finally embraced Harry and Hermione. "Oh, thank goodness! I was so worried. The paper said there were bodies. You're alive." She turned back to hug the twins, sobbing about having yelled at them before they left. Breakfast was a sombre affair. Mr. Weasley and Percy barely stayed long enough to wolf down some toast before heading into the ministry to deal with the aftermath. Harry didn't know who Rita Skeeter was, but he had a feeling he was about to find out. Harry couldn't shake his dislike for Rita Skeeter. Her article was fueling more fear and anxiety than the Death Eaters themselves. He seized the opportunity to slip away when the rest of the Weasleys decided to start a game of Quidditch in the garden. "I'll be out in a minute," he called, rushing up to Ron's room to dig through his backpack for the two-way mirror. "Sirius Black," he said quickly. In no time, Sirius's worried face filled the glass. It was clear he'd been waiting for the call. "Harry, are you all right?" "Remus, it's Harry!" Sirius shouted. A moment later, Remus squeezed in beside him, causing Sirius to hold the mirror a bit further out so they could both see Harry. "I'm fine. Everything's fine," Harry assured them, his voice hurried. "What happened?" The Prophet article was full of so much nonsense. "It's hard to tell what the truth is," Sirius said, ignoring the scolding look Remus shot his way for swearing. Harry quickly recounted the events of the night, including the incident with Crouch's elf and the dark mark. "Barty Crouch has always been a heartless bastard," Sirius growled, his eyes darkening. "You're sure you're all right?" "Completely, I promise," Harry insisted. He longed to reach through the mirror and hug his godfather. He had grown accustomed to the easy affection they'd shared over the summer. "Sirius, you need to send a letter to Mrs. Malfoy. Lucius was part of the group, and Draco mentioned he made her be part of it too." Sirius and Remus exchanged a grim look. "I'll ask Severus to check in on her," Remus promised. "He's away at the moment, doing some damage control." "He wasn't there last night, was he?" Harry asked, feeling relieved when Remus shook his head. "No, he was home. Had no idea about it all until it was too late. Obviously, they were only involving people who were already at the cup." Who could have cast the dark mark? Harry wondered aloud. Both adults shrugged, and Sirius ran a hand through his hair, deep in thought. Harry ran a hand through his hair. It could have been any number of people. We'll look into it, but don't dwell on it too much, all right, pup? Enjoy the rest of your summer. Leave this to the adults. He let out a long sigh. Merlin, I'm so glad you're safe. I miss you, Harry confessed softly. All of you. Even Snape, to his surprise. We miss you too, cub, Remus replied. It's been far too quiet without you around. Except for the fireworks Sirius let off in the entrance hall, he added, casting a reproachful glance at Sirius. Sirius grinned, adopting an exaggeratedly innocent expression. Harry knew they were trying to lift his spirits, and he couldn't help but laugh. I should go. The others will be wondering what's taking me so long. He had told them he was heading to the bathroom. They probably thought he had fallen in. Let us know if anything else happens. Keep in touch and have a good week. We love you, pup. Sirius kissed his fingers and pressed them to the mirror's surface. Harry's heart clenched. He reluctantly ended the call, taking a moment to compose himself before tucking the mirror back into his bag. With his broom in hand, he headed out to the garden, plastering a smile on his face as he saw the Weasley siblings already airborne, with Hermione reading a book on the grass below. There you are, mate. We've been waiting for you, Ron called, waving him over. Harry kicked off into the sky, trying to leave his worries on the ground. There was nothing he could do about it all now. Severus returned home just in time for dinner, and the first thing Remus said was that they'd heard from Potter. He's fine, they're all fine, Remus assured him. Severus felt the dread inside him build with every word as Remus relayed what had happened in the woods. Narcissa is well, he informed Remus and Black when they discussed Harry's worries. He'd visited her and Draco earlier, while Lucius was at the ministry. She's shaken but doing well. She was indeed part of the group involved in the muggle baiting. She believes the whole thing was Lucius's idea, or at least he was involved in the planning. She said he didn't tell her anything beforehand, but he knew exactly where to go when it started. It was exactly the sort of chaos Lucius Malfoy would relish, creating horror at such a public event. If he and the other loyal Death Eaters were picking up on the same signs, they would undoubtedly become bolder in their hateful acts. If they believed the Dark Lord was on his way back, they would want to spread as much fear as possible before that day arrived. This is only the beginning, you realize. The two Gryffindors looked grim, hardly touching their dinner. Snape, Black said eventually. I know we have a difficult history. Severus snorted. That was the biggest understatement he'd heard in a while. And I know we still have our differences, despite the things that bring us together. He glanced at Remus, who bumped his knee against Severus's under the table. But please, for Remus if not for me, look after Harry when he's back at school. He can't defend himself properly, not with Dumbledore lurking over his shoulder. If anything were to happen to him, he didn't need to finish. It would devastate both men if anything were to befall Potter. Just please. He needs all the allies he can get. I can't be there for him, but you can. Severus pursed his lips. Were they really going to make him say it? I'll admit I have come to tolerate the boy, he said, as if the very confession pained him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Remus try to hide a fond smile. Damnable wolf. This summer has made me realize he's not as arrogant as I initially believed. When he's not being antagonized, he's not terrible. There, that was the best Severus could offer. Truthfully, he had come to quite like the Potter boy. Harry was unexpectedly witty, and his Slytherin tendencies emerged in interesting and sometimes amusing ways. He now understood what Remus meant when he said that Harry was so much like Lily. At times, Harry's words and those green eyes staring back at him felt like having her back. "I'll watch over him as faithfully as you would," he vowed to the two Gryffindors. Not only because he knew his life wouldn't be worth living if Remus found out he let something happen to the boy while under his care, but also because he genuinely didn't want any harm to come to Harry. "I will still need to keep up appearances, but his safety is my priority." He had risked his life for the boy before, back when he couldn't stand him. He could certainly do it again now that Harry was tolerable. "Thank you," Black breathed, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Snape, Severus, thank you." It was strange to hear his given name come from the Gryffindor's lips without a hint of mockery or derision. At the beginning of summer, they had agreed to be cordial for Remus's sake, but the more time they spent together, the more Severus realized that Black wasn't the bull-headed little brat he had been in their youth. Harry wasn't the only one who had become tolerable. "We are on the same side, Sirius," he said, the name feeling unfamiliar on his tongue. "If war is to come, then there's no place for childhood grudges here." Sirius nodded at him across the table, understanding passing between them. Beside him, Remus beamed with pride. "I knew you two would warm up to each other eventually," he said fondly. Severus scoffed. They weren't friends by any stretch of the imagination, but perhaps, with Remus and Harry and the darkness looming ahead, they could become something like it. Chapter 18. Despite the hectic start, the rest of Harry's time at the Burrow unfolded much like it always had. Mr. Weasley and Percy were barely around during the week following the World Cup, buried under a mountain of work, howlers, and more scathing articles from Rita Skeeter. Harry felt sympathy for them. Even Percy didn't deserve that kind of stress. Having the two eldest Weasley boys around brought a refreshing change to the dynamic. Although they weren't always home, often off visiting British friends they hadn't seen in ages, when they were present, they were usually up for whatever mischief the teenagers had planned. Harry made a point to spend time with them, recalling what Hannah had mentioned the previous year about them likely being the next heirs to the Weasley and Pruitt seats. He never quite managed to bring up the subject, but he got to know them well enough to sense their trustworthiness. One thing Harry struggled to adjust to was not using his wand. He had become so accustomed to casting spells without hesitation at Serendu that he often found his wand in hand before he realized it. This earned him some curious glances from Ron and Hermione, but Harry suspected they simply thought he was a bit jumpy after the cup. Whatever time Ron and Hermione had spent together before Harry arrived at the Burrow had clearly been used to resolve the lingering issues from the previous year. Ron had accused Hermione's cat of eating scabbers and had been awful to her for half the school year. However, discovering that the rat was actually a Death Eater in disguise had likely helped ease that conflict. Things were almost back to normal among the trio, except for the fact that Harry was still keeping secrets, and Ron and Hermione didn't seem to realize that he had matured over the past year while they were busy arguing. Ron didn't appreciate it when Harry dismissed his disparaging comments about Slytherins, and Hermione nearly exploded when Harry declined her offer to help him finish his summer homework. "I've got this," Harry insisted. "It's all done at the Dursleys," Harry insisted. "Thanks, but you guys go ahead." The offer had come only after Ron realized he still had a stack of essays to complete, and Hermione had pestered him into finishing them before they boarded the train to school. "I can go over them for you then," Hermione replied dismissively. Harry bristled at the implication that his work wasn't good enough. "I don't need you to go over them for me, Hermione, but thank you." He tried to remain polite. Even if she didn't know that Remus had already reviewed his summer homework, who was she to assume his work needed checking and correcting? "Don't be silly, Harry. I really don't mind. You'll be better off for it." "I'm happy with my work as it is," Harry said through clenched teeth. I'm going to go find the twins." He slipped out of the room before she could argue further, rolling his eyes when Ron complained about having to study while Harry didn't. Last year, Hermione had been too busy with her overloaded timetable and Buckbeak's appeal to care much about Harry's grades. If she planned to spend the entire next year insisting he needed her help, ignoring the fact that he was clearly capable on his own, they were going to have issues. A couple of days before they were due back at school, they were all out in the garden, soaking up the last rays of summer sunshine. Hermione and Ginny were stretched out on a blanket by the pond, talking quietly and giggling occasionally. The two girls had become thick as thieves that summer, and Harry found himself wondering what they talked about so much. From the looks they shot him before bursting into laughter, he probably didn't want to know. Meanwhile, Harry and the other boys were high in the air on their brooms. Bill had brought an old quaffle home, and they were tossing it between them, brainstorming increasingly ridiculous forfeits for their game. Harry was currently perched side-saddle on his broom, making it even trickier to catch any future passes. Despite the challenge, he was holding his own. Charlie was struggling, working with one hand tied behind his back, and it was not helping his game. "This is ridiculous," the dragon tamer exclaimed as the quaffle dropped to the ground below him. "I was never a chaser for a reason." He swooped down to retrieve it, zipping back up to the same level as the others. "They're really putting us seekers through our paces, huh?" he added to Harry with a grin. "If we had a snitch, we could show them what we're made of." Harry recalled the little wooden box tucked away in his trunk. "I've got a practice snitch," he offered. Charlie stared at him, incredulous. "And you're just mentioning this now? Poor show, Potter." He shook his head in mock disappointment before a grin broke across his face, his eyes sparkling with challenge. "Fancy a seekers match?" Harry, who had spent the summer chasing the snitch without any real competition, except for that one glorious day when Draco visited, smirked. "You're on." He landed and dashed up to Ron's bedroom, weaving through the extra beds and piles of clothes until he reached his trunk. After a moment of rummaging, he found the box containing his practice snitch. When he returned to the garden, all the boys had landed, and even Ginny and Hermione had abandoned their blanket, drawn in by the excitement. Bill held out his hand and Harry passed him the box. "All right, seekers," Bill announced, adopting an overly serious tone that barely concealed his amusement. "Here are the rules. The snitch gets a 10-second head start, and you have to keep your eyes closed. If it goes over the property line, we'll summon it back. We don't want any muggles seeing things they shouldn't. And I want a good, clean match, all right?" He was channeling Madam Hooch, which made both seekers snicker. Harry and Charlie shook hands, then mounted their brooms, ready for the challenge ahead. Bill flicked open the lid of the box, and Harry's gaze locked onto the little golden ball as it unfurled its wings and shot into the air. Clearing his throat, Bill signaled the start. Harry squeezed his eyes shut, and the other Weasley siblings launched into a loud countdown. Even Hermione joined in halfway through. 3, 2, 1, go! Both seekers took off like rockets, with Harry quickly pulling ahead of Charlie. Charlie was on one of the newer model clean sweeps, an excellent broom, but it couldn't compete with Harry's firebolt. He made a wide loop around the backyard, eyes peeled for a flash of gold. Unable to resist, Harry threw in a few tricks and rolls he'd been practicing over the summer, earning cheers and whoops from their small audience. Charlie laughed as he chased Harry through a particularly sharp Wollongong shimmy. "You'll have to try better than that to lose me, Potter." Grinning at the challenge, Harry shot up high and Charlie followed. Suddenly, Harry spotted the snitch down below, and his smirk widened. time to show off a bit. He turned the nose of his broom downward and dove full speed. Charlie shouted a curse as he followed, but Harry didn't hesitate. He picked up speed, getting closer and closer to the grass. The world around him faded away. His focus narrowed entirely to his broom and the snitch hovering just above the ground. He was vaguely aware when Charlie pulled out of the dive, unwilling to risk it, but Harry waited until the last second, veering off course and reaching out as his toes skimmed the grass, grabbing the snitch on his way past. Slowing to a halt, he held the golden ball up to a stunned Charlie and winked. "Found it," he said. Charlie gaped at him. "You certainly did, didn't you?" he replied faintly, drifting closer. "Blimey, Harry, I think Oliver, you might have been underplaying your skills a bit in your letters. That was some serious flying." Charlie ruffled Harry's hair, and Harry grinned back at him. As they landed, the crowd erupted in cheers, and Harry caught sight of Fred and Ron exchanging money, with Ron looking rather put out. "You bet against me?" Harry feigned offence, watching Ron's ears turn red. "Well, no offence, mate, but Charlie was really good, and—" Ron stammered out some half-hearted excuses, prompting a laugh from Harry. "You could have just said you were showing family solidarity," he teased, still breathless and exhilarated from the intense flying. He turned back to the dragon tamer. "Want to go again? Let's swap brooms this time." Charlie's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You'll let me ride your firebolt?" he gasped. Harry nodded. "You're on. Best 3 out of 5? "What do I get for winning?" Charlie asked cheekily, making Harry smirk. "You cocky little sod. If you win, I'll owe you a favour. You can call it in any time, no questions asked, even if it's to hex one of my siblings. Oh, and I'll let you take the rest of that bottle of fire whiskey to school," Charlie added with a grin. "If I win, you'll owe me a favour, no questions asked. And I get to use your firebolt as much as I like before you head back to school," Harry replied, knowing he would have let Charlie borrow his broom anyway. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of favour the dragon tamer might ask. But since he didn't plan on losing, it was a moot point. So, we're at 1 for Harry. The firebolt trades hands every round, and if it looks like whoever's riding it is winning because of that, Harry can take my broom, Bill declared, still in referee mode. "Ready?" They swapped brooms, and the match began anew. Charlie was having a blast on the firebolt, zooming around with infectious enthusiasm. Harry whooped with joy as he kept pace with Charlie on the clean sweep, quickly adapting to its speed and turning radius. Within minutes he spotted the snitch and took off. Charlie was right on his tail, overtaking him in an instant, but Harry executed a tricky maneuver, pulling ahead once more, his hand closing around the elusive snitch. They came to a halt, and Charlie stared at him in disbelief. "Oh, come on," he muttered. Harry snorted, but the competition wasn't over yet. Charlie claimed victory in the 3rd round, the snitch drifting past him while he and Harry were at opposite ends of the garden. The 4th round was neck and neck, but Harry managed to edge out in front. "And that's 3-1 to Mr. Harry Potter," Bill announced over the cheers of their spectators. Charlie cursed, but he wore a smile as he landed. "Bloody hell, Harry, that's seriously impressive." They shook hands. "You made it hard for me, though," Harry insisted. "Considering you haven't played a proper match since you graduated, that was something." Charlie chuckled. "You flatter me, but thank you. I suppose I'll just wait for you to call in your favour then, Harry wasn't sure what he might need from the Weasley brother, but it was always good to have options. He carefully placed the snitch back in its box and took his firebolt back from Charlie. Shortly after, they were called in for dinner. Harry left his broom in the hallway with the others and followed the delicious aroma wafting from the kitchen. "Oh, I hope they're home soon," Mrs. Weasley fretted, glancing from the 2 empty spots at the table to the clock in the corner that indicated they were at work. "Arthur hasn't had to work this much since the war." The kids exchanged uneasy glances. "I'm sure they'll be home in a bit, Mum," Bill reassured her. "They probably just got held up chatting. You know what Dad's like." Just then, the clock's hands shifted from work to travelling, and a pair of quiet figures appeared in the doorway. The pops of magical apparitions announced the arrival of the last 2 members of the Weasley family. Mr. Weasley looked exhausted as he greeted his wife with a kiss on the cheek before sinking wearily into his chair. "Merlin, what a week," he sighed, shaking his head. "I'll be glad when this all blows over. It would have happened ages ago if Skeeter didn't keep pushing those awful articles." "At least it's getting people to take the search for Bertha Jorkins seriously," Percy pointed out. "Mr. Crouch has been saying for weeks that someone needed to look for her." Behind his back, the twins fluttered their eyelashes and mock swooned, dramatically mouthing, "Mr. Crouch." Harry snickered into his stew. "Crouch is very lucky Rita hasn't found out about Winky," Mr. Weasley retorted irritably. "And he's probably just hoping it stays that way." That comment set Hermione off on a passionate rant about house elves, and Harry winced. He appreciated her sentiment, but wished she would research a topic thoroughly before forming such strong opinions and sharing them with anyone who would listen. "Why don't you all go up and finish packing?" Mrs. Weasley interjected before Hermione could really get on her soapbox. "I put all your new school things in your rooms. Hermione, dear, I got that book you asked for, and I finished the laundry." "Thanks, Mrs. Weasley," Hermione replied automatically, momentarily diverted from her tirade. For now. Everyone of Hogwarts age trudged upstairs, and Harry heard the rain thundering against the windows. "Sounds like we finished flying just in time," he mused as he headed up to Ron's room. The twins' belongings were still in their room, which was currently housing Bill and Charlie, except, of course, for the bag full of Weasley's wizard wheezes tucked away in Harry's trunk, just in case Mrs. Weasley decided to conduct one last search. Harry hadn't really unpacked since arriving, so repacking didn't take long. He ducked downstairs to grab his broom, trying not to disturb anyone. Harry tried his best to follow Sirius's advice and stay out of the adults' conversation in the kitchen. He made his way back to Ron's room, where Ron was holding up a long maroon velvet dress, complete with mouldy-looking lace at the cuffs and collar. The disgust on Ron's face was unmistakable. "What the hell is this?" Ron exclaimed. A sense of foreboding washed over Harry as the answer came to him. They needed dress robes for school this year. Snape had mentioned that there would always be some sort of formal event tied to the Triwizard Tournament. With Remus's help, Harry had chosen a set of dark green robes with gold accents, and he thought he looked quite dashing in them. Surely Mrs. Weasley couldn't expect Ron to wear that dress. Just then Mrs. Weasley knocked on the door and entered, carrying a pile of freshly laundered school robes. "Here you are, Ron, dear. Harry, are you absolutely sure you don't want me to do yours as well? I can get them done tonight." "It's fine, thanks, Mrs. Weasley," Harry replied. Kerry had taken care of all his clothes before he left, including his robes and new cloak. "Mum, you've given me Ginny's new dress," Ron said, holding out the offending garment. Mrs. Weasley confirmed that they were indeed Ron's dress robes, her cheeks flushing. "I had to get them second-hand. There wasn't a lot of choice." "I'm not wearing them," Ron insisted hotly. "I'd rather go starkers." "Fine. Harry, make sure you get a picture. I could use a good laugh." With that, Mrs. Weasley stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Ron threw the dress robes into his open trunk, making an angry noise. Harry decided to leave him to sulk and slipped out of the room, heading downstairs to see what the twins were up to. "What's going on?" he asked as he entered the common area. "Upstairs, then?" Fred asked as Harry closed the door behind him. Harry grimaced. "Ron just discovered his new dress robes. They're not pretty." He glanced over at the wardrobe, where 2 sets of dress robes belonging to the twins hung, ready to be packed. They were clearly second-hand, but still nicer than Ron's. Both were in similar shades of dark purple, one adorned with silver embroidery around the cuffs and hem, the other trimmed with bronze piping. Not a scrap of lace in sight. "Poor Ronikins," George Mock sighed, shaking his head. "So hard done by." He should have swallowed his pride and agreed to borrow Bill's old dress robes, like Mum offered before you got here. He said they were too girly. "They had a little bit of pink on them," Fred added, rolling his eyes. "Pretty snazzy otherwise, if you ask me. I'd have worn them if Bill wasn't so bloody tall." Harry snickered. Maybe Mrs. Weasley had bought the frilly robes on purpose, after all. It was pouring rain the morning they had to catch the Hogwarts Express. As they waited in the hallway for the taxis Mrs. Weasley had arranged, Harry glanced at the fleet of enormous Hogwarts trunks stacked by the door. "Mrs. Weasley," he said tentatively, "should we maybe use shrinking charms on the trunks? Muggle taxis might not have enough space for all this. It would be bad enough travelling with Pig and Crookshanks. Hedwig was off delivering a letter to Gorak, disguised as Harry writing to Sirius." Mrs. Weasley, already flustered from her husband's unexpected disappearance to deal with Mad-Eye Moody, looked up with a worried expression. "Harry's probably right," Bill agreed, pulling his wand from his jacket pocket. In short order, he and Charlie had the trunks shrunk, and they ended up in Mrs. Weasley's enormous handbag. As Harry suspected, the 3 taxi drivers seemed utterly bewildered. Bewildered by the owl in the cage, Pig was making quite a racket, wedged into the back seat on Ron's lap. Crookshanks wasn't thrilled either, and by the time they reached King's Cross, Harry, Ron and Hermione were covered in scratches. "I'm really sorry," Hermione said for what felt like the 100th time as they stepped through the barrier onto platform 9 3/4, her cat securely tucked under her arm. They moved to the side, and Charlie began resizing everyone's trunks. After they found a compartment and stowed their luggage, they returned to the platform to say goodbye to Mrs. Weasley, Bill and Charlie. "Keep in touch," Bill urged with a grin, pulling Ron into a hug after he finished with the twins. "You lot are in for one hell of a year. I want to hear all about it." "You too, Harry," he added, hugging the dark-haired teen tightly. "I might see you all sooner than you think," Charlie confessed, releasing Ginny with a kiss on the forehead. "Why's that?" Fred asked quickly. Charlie tapped his nose conspiratorially and winked. "Secret," he insisted. "Don't tell Percy I mentioned it. It's classified information until the Ministry sees fit to release it," he droned, rolling his eyes. Harry's gaze narrowed thoughtfully. Did that mean Charlie was involved in the tournament somehow? The 2 eldest Weasley boys delighted in teasing their siblings with veiled references to the secret surprise, right up until the whistle blew, urging them to hurry and catch the train. As they headed for their compartment, Harry spotted Neville wandering with his trunk. "Oi, Neville!" he called, waving an arm. The round-faced boy looked up. "Want to sit with us?" Neville grinned and nodded, and the 4 of them took their seats, shoving Neville's trunk into the luggage rack with their own before shutting the compartment door. "Why wouldn't they just tell us what's going on this year?" Ron wondered aloud. Ron groused. "We wouldn't tell anyone." Harry replied, trying to soothe him. "From the sounds of things, we'll find out tonight anyway," as if he didn't already know the secret. "How was your summer, Neville?" He feigned ignorance, despite having written to Neville regularly. Neville grinned back. "It was great. Gran let me set up a whole section for aquatic plants in the greenhouse." As Neville excitedly shared details about his new specimens, Harry's thoughts drifted to the dilapidated greenhouse at Serendu. He had planned to start clearing it out over the summer, hoping to grow some potion ingredients. He actually enjoyed gardening during his time with the Dursleys, but it turned out to be a much bigger project than any of them had anticipated. Remus and Sirius had promised to help clear it out in time for next summer. Maybe by then he could tell Neville about it and ask for advice. Neville didn't even know the truth about Sirius yet. Throughout the journey, several familiar faces stopped by, and with each visit, Ron's retelling of the Quidditch World Cup grew more elaborate. While he gave Neville a fairly accurate account, by the time Seamus and Dean joined them, Ron was describing their narrow escape from a pack of Death Eaters who supposedly almost hexed him several times. Harry and Hermione exchanged an exasperated glance. At one point, they managed to steer the conversation towards the match itself, rather than the chaos that followed. Neville listened enviously as Harry and Ron recounted the thrilling moments. "Gran didn't want to go," Neville said, sounding miserable. "She's not into Quidditch. It sounds amazing, though." Ron jumped up, rummaging through his trunk to pull out his small figure of Victor Crumb. "Look at this. We saw him up close, too. We were in the top box." "For the first and last time in your life, Weasley." The familiar drawl made Harry's head snap up, and he was grateful for his darker skin when he felt his cheeks heat up. Draco's hair had grown a bit longer since the cup, falling into his silver-grey eyes. He looked good. Behind him, Crabbe and Goyle stood, their expressions suitably menacing. "Don't remember asking you to join us, Malfoy," Harry said coolly, trying to prevent any explosive arguments before Ron could chime in. They all had their roles to play, but he wasn't keen on starting a fight before the term even began. Unfortunately, that wasn't in the cards. As much as Draco and Harry had become friends, the same couldn't be said for him and Ron, and Draco seized every opportunity to taunt the redhead. "Weasley, what is that?" he sneered, pointing at a sleeve of Ron's dress robes that was sticking out of his trunk, clearly dislodged when Ron grabbed the Crumb figurine. The lace cuff swayed with the motion of the train, drawing Draco's attention. Ron quickly tried to shove it out of sight, but Draco was too fast, and soon he was holding the robes up in front of him. "Good Merlin!" he exclaimed, examining them closely. "You weren't thinking about wearing these, were you?" He paused for dramatic effect. "I'm sure they were the height of fashion in, about 1890. He trailed off with a laugh, and Crabbe and Goyle joined in, their laughter echoing in the compartment. Ron's face turned bright red. Harry wanted to feel offended on his friend's behalf, but he couldn't help it. The robes were terrible. Ron should have just taken Bill's old ones, pink or not. "Shove off, Malfoy," Ron scowled, snatching the robes back and tossing them into the corner of the compartment. Even Neville grimaced at the sight. "Maybe you should think about entering," Draco suggested with a smirk. "There's money involved, you know. You could buy some decent robes then." Harry knew that Draco was well aware that underage wizards couldn't enter. He was just trying to provoke Ron. The Slytherin laughed, enjoying the moment. Confusion washed over Harry. "You mean you don't know?" Draco shot a glance at him, and Harry shook his head slightly. Draco's smirk grew wider. "Oh, that's just precious. My father told me ages ago. I suppose yours isn't senior enough to have been informed." "Or Ron's father just respects when things are supposed to stay secret," Hermione interjected icily. Draco laughed, dismissing her comment. As if everyone else's parents didn't tell them right away. They probably just don't discuss the important things in front of him. Satisfied with his annual pre-sorting mockery of Ron Weasley, Draco turned his attention back to Harry. Harry wished he could find a way to talk to Draco privately, but that would have to wait until they reached school. The train was far too crowded for that. Instead, he managed a brief smile, which quickly turned into a glare when he caught Ron looking at him. When Draco left, Ron slammed the compartment door shut so hard that the window cracked. "Oh, honestly, Ron," Hermione muttered, pulling out her wand to fix it. "You shouldn't let him get to you like that." Ron, still sulking over the dress robes, scowled and crushed the last remaining cauldron cake in his hands. Harry exchanged an uneasy look with Neville. Rooming with Ron in this mood was bound to be interesting. Hopefully he would perk up once the tournament was announced. As they reached Hogsmeade Station, they hurried to the carriages, eager to escape the pouring rain. "Has the weather ever been so bad that they can't take the first years across in boats?" Harry wondered aloud, watching Hagrid lead a group of tiny, bedraggled 11-year-olds toward the lake. "I don't think so," Hermione replied. "I've certainly never read about it. They always find a way." Harry quickly cast a drying charm over himself, even though he knew he'd just end up soaked again by the time he reached the castle. It was better than sitting in the carriage in damp robes. Thankfully, he finally made it to the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall, his clothes magically dry for the third time, thanks to Peeves and his water balloons, and eagerly awaited the start of the feast. As the drenched first years were led in, leaving a trail of water behind them, Harry realized this was the first sorting he'd actually witnessed since his own. He was surprised when the Sorting Hat's song was completely different this year, highlighting the virtues of each house individually. Harry's thoughts drifted back to Sirius's words from the night before he left Serendu, his insistence that the war could only be won through the houses working together. Perhaps the hat was trying to convey something important. There seemed to be 1,000 first years to sort, and Harry's stomach rumbled expectantly while the golden plates in front of him remained frustratingly empty. He tried to pay attention, hoping to catch any names that sounded familiar from his readings about the Wizengamot. But aside from the Carrow twins, who both ended up in Slytherin, there weren't any he recognized. At last, it was time to eat. Harry ravenously filled his plate, tuning out most of the conversation around him. He grimaced when nearly headless Nick mentioned that Hogwarts was staffed by house elves, immediately triggering Hermione's passionate response. That was bound to be a problem this year, wasn't it? At the end of the feast, Dumbledore stood to deliver his start-of-term speech. Harry hadn't realized that the Triwizard Tournament would mean cancelling Quidditch, and his outrage was mirrored by several others from every house. He caught Cedric Diggory's eye across the room. The boy looked upset by the news. So much for that rematch. The unexpected interruption from Mad Eye Moody made Harry uneasy. When the man's magical eye landed on him, its unnaturally bright blue hue felt like it was piercing right through him. He made a mental note to ask Sirius exactly what that magical eye was capable of. Harry didn't know much about Mad Eye Moody, just what Mr. Weasley had shared that morning, but it was clear that he was at least friends with Dumbledore. That didn't exactly inspire confidence in Harry. He knew he had to be careful around Moody until he figured him out. Harry pretended to be just as surprised by the announcement of the Triwizard Tournament as everyone else. The twins, unsurprisingly, were among those who were not pleased to hear that only wizards of age by the end of October would be able to enter. "We're so close, we're practically 17, Fred insisted as they walked up to Gryffindor Tower. "There's got to be a way to get around it," George agreed. Once our names are in the running, they won't be able to turn us down. Harry doubted it would be that simple, but he stayed quiet as the twins plotted ways to outsmart the impartial judge. When they extended the offer to Ron and Harry, he couldn't help but snort. "I think I get into enough trouble during a regular school year without seeking it out, don't you?" he pointed out dryly. Fred shrugged. "Yeah, mate, you're probably right. Ah well, more glory for us." After bidding everyone good night, they headed off to their respective dormitories. Harry grinned at Dean's new poster of Victor Crumb. Maybe he should have brought his Holyhead Harpies poster instead of leaving it in his room. He could have explained it away as a birthday present or something, although he'd have to come up with a reasonable explanation for why it was the Harpies. Perhaps he could buy a Puddlemere poster to support Oliver instead. Changing into his pyjamas, he pushed all thoughts of Quidditch and posters out of his mind. He drew the curtains around his bed and set the usual privacy charms. Now that he was back at school, all his plans for the year came rushing back to him. He wanted to bring the houses closer together, even the Slytherin ones, if he could. If he could get everyone working together before Dumbledore or Voldemort reached them, they might stand a chance at untangling the mess of the wizarding world after the war. Planning for battle was all well and good, but someone needed to consider what came next. Otherwise, they'd find themselves repeating the mistakes of the past, burying their heads in the sand and relying on Albus Dumbledore to handle everything. On top of that, he had to stay low-key and avoid drawing Dumbledore's attention while figuring out who he could trust within the castle. At the moment, that list was quite short. Chapter 19. The next morning, Harry woke up early. He quietly left the dorm and made his way to breakfast alone. The Great Hall was mostly empty, with only a handful of students scattered about. As Harry approached the Gryffindor table, someone suddenly bumped into his shoulder. "Watch where you're going, Potter," Draco sneered, glaring at him. Harry met his gaze, but inside he felt a spark of excitement. He slipped his hand into his robe pocket and felt a scrap of parchment he hadn't noticed before. He waited until he was seated to unfold it discreetly under the table. "Tonight, after curfew, 4th floor charms room?" He glanced up at the Slytherin table, giving Draco the slightest nod, trying not to smile too broadly. "Morning, Harry," came a cheerful voice from the nearby Hufflepuff bench. It was Susan Bones, who was absent-mindedly braiding her wavy copper hair over her shoulder. "Hi, Susan. Did you have a good summer?" "It wasn't bad until the cup happened. Aunt Amelia's barely been home since then. It's all madness." Harry remembered that Susan's aunt was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and grimaced. She was probably even busier than Mr. Weasley. "Did you end up listening to that lecture I told you about?" Susan had mentioned a broadcast on the Wizarding Wireless discussing how the lack of information for Muggle-borns entering the Wizarding world was leading to a gradual Mugglefication of their society, which could eventually expose them. "Yeah, it was really interesting," Harry said enthusiastically, straddling the bench to eat his porridge while keeping the conversation going. "He made a lot of good points, but I thought some of it was a bit extreme. The Wizarding world can adapt to the future without being overrun by Muggles. I mean, wouldn't it be so much easier to use pens and notebooks instead of quills? Why can't we use something other than quills and endless rolls of parchment in class? How about computers? They're becoming more popular with Muggles. If someone could figure out how to make Muggle technology work with magic, it'd be a total game changer. That would just increase the chances of the Wizarding world being discovered, though," Hannah Abbott chimed in, joining the conversation. With a Muggle-born father who took her mother's pure-blood surname after they married, she was quite familiar with Muggle technology. Imagine if someone managed to create a separate internet for the wizarding world. All it would take is one tech-savvy muggle to crack it, and we'd be exposed for everyone to see. Hannah made a valid point, and Harry pondered her words. Okay, maybe not that much of a cultural exchange then, but you can't argue against pens. Oh, Merlin, no. Dad's been saying the wizarding world should switch for years. One of these days, I swear, I'm going to do my homework with a biro just to see what the teachers say, Hannah laughed. The fact is, if we keep pushing away everything Muggle and refuse to learn about them, we'll only stand out more, Susan said, steering the conversation back on track. Harry, you were at the World Cup, right? You saw how some of the older folks dressed in Muggle clothing. How do they expect to stay incognito if they don't know anything about Muggle life? Harry recalled some of the more interesting outfits he'd seen at the Cup. Susan was right. How could wizards blend in with Muggles if they didn't know the first thing about them? Just then, Ron and Hermione arrived, looking bewildered by Harry's choice of company. "There you are," Hermione exclaimed, dropping a stack of books on the table beside her. Harry couldn't fathom how she had so many books when they didn't even have their timetables yet. Both she and Ron seemed intent on ignoring Harry's Hufflepuff friends. Harry spoke to him as if he were alone. The two girls exchanged an annoyed glance and got to their feet. "See you later, Harry," Susan said. Once they left, Ron turned to him, looking suspicious. "What were you talking to Hufflepuffs for?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize it was such a big deal," he replied a bit sharply. "We were talking about the World Cup." "Sort of. Eventually. Tangentially." Ron seemed taken aback that Harry didn't see the issue with speaking to those outside his own house. "Really, Ron, it's not like they're Slytherins," Hermione pointed out diplomatically as she buttered a slice of toast. Harry wondered what Ron and Hermione would think if he had been talking to Slytherins, and scowled into his orange juice. Just then, McGonagall came around to hand out timetables. Harry examined his. Herbology with the Hufflepuffs first thing. Maybe he would sit with Hannah and Susan instead of Ron and Hermione, just to make a point. But he couldn't risk Dumbledore getting suspicious. It would be a clear sign that the compulsion charm had worn off if he started socializing with people outside his own house. He was expected to be the perfect little Gryffindor, which evidently meant only valuing the opinions of fellow Gryffindors. Was that normal? He wondered. Did kids spend their entire Hogwarts careers only talking to those in their own house? He glanced around the hall. No, there were plenty of groups mingling with mixed colours on their robes. It wasn't common, but it wasn't unusual either. As he finished his breakfast, Harry began to devise a plan. If he could encourage all the houses to mix more, without it being solely his idea, perhaps Dumbledore wouldn't catch on to the truth. He could frame it as a show of unity in the face of international competition. They would all need to rally behind the Hogwarts champion, whoever that turned out to be. That seemed like a good start. He ignored Ron and continued to think. Hermione was bickering about house elves when Harry stood up, mumbling something about needing to grab his herbology book. He knew he needed to gather the heirs soon and start brainstorming ideas. Together, they could surely come up with something. It would be baby steps, but eventually they'd get there. He was playing a dangerous game, going against Dumbledore right under his nose. Yet, despite promising Sirius he wouldn't go looking for trouble, he couldn't just sit idle. Whatever Dumbledore had planned for him was clearly meant to unfold before he turned 17. The goblins had warned him that with the block on his core, he wouldn't survive his coming of age. That meant he was running out of time to take the upper hand. Last year he had kept his head down, but now it was time to set the pieces in motion. That night, Harry donned his invisibility cloak and made his way to the 4th floor charms room. He grinned when he spotted Draco waiting for him, a deck of cards in hand. Draco perked up as Harry removed the cloak. "You're late," he said, a hint of reprimand in his voice. "Sorry," Harry replied with an apologetic look. "Ron wouldn't go to sleep." "Are you all right?" Draco asked, noticing Harry's unease. Harry was still a bit shaken from witnessing Moody turn Draco into a ferret and bounce him around the hall. Ron had thought it was the funniest thing ever, but Harry was horrified that a teacher would use such magic on a student. He was relieved to see McGonagall looking equally appalled. "I'm fine. Uncle Severus gave me something for the bruises," Draco assured him. "It's just my pride that's wounded." "Moody's a jerk," Harry declared, pausing as his thoughts turned to graver matters. How did things go after the cup? It could have been worse. Father was fairly pleased with how everything went at the cup. No one got caught. And with all those articles that blasted Skeeter woman put out, it's certainly made it memorable, Harry remarked, making a face. That was an understatement. "But, Harry, I heard some things this summer. Father said the Dark Lord is coming back." Harry pursed his lips, remaining silent. He wished he could assure Draco that it wasn't true. The blonde's expression crumbled. "We don't know how or when," Harry said quickly, trying to reassure him, "but it's inevitable now. Snape says his mark is getting darker." He shared the prophecy Trelawney had made at the end of the previous year and explained how Wormtail was probably with Voldemort now, based on a dream he'd had. Not only did Draco know most of Harry's secrets, he was the only one of Harry's friends who knew about Serendu, after all, but he was also balancing the pressure from his father and Dumbledore, much like Harry was. It felt good to talk openly with someone who understood. By the end of the conversation, Draco looked even paler than usual. They had both abandoned their cards, and Harry's foot bounced anxiously. He was acutely aware that in this situation, Draco was in far more danger than he was. "What if he comes back? What if Father tries to make me join him?" Draco asked, his voice trembling. Harry reached across the table, gripping Draco's hand tightly. "I won't let anything happen to you or your mother," he vowed. "You can come hide at Serendu if it comes to that. No one will find you there. And even if he does return, surely your father won't expect you to do anything until you're of age." Draco scoffed, looking bleak. "You don't know my father. If he wants you, he'll have to go through me," Harry declared fiercely. Draco met his gaze with a hesitant smile, but then his eyes fell to their joined hands. Harry felt a blush creep across his cheeks as he let go and hastily picked up his cards. Voldemort wasn't getting to Draco, not if he had anything to say about it. Draco was Harry's. He was only just beginning to realize how deep that connection ran, how desperately he wanted that to be true. Thanks to a note passed to Hannah in herbology and another to Daphne in transfiguration, Harry managed to gather all the trustworthy heirs in one of the abandoned 6th floor classrooms after dinner on the first Thursday back. He made up an excuse for Ron and Hermione about having detention with Snape, a cover the man would probably be happy to corroborate if needed. Hurrying up to the seldom-used corridor, he slipped into the room after making sure no one was watching. It seemed he was the last to arrive. Looking around at the familiar faces, he counted 11 in total, 12 including himself. Harry was amused to realize they had an equal number from each house. "What's this about, Potter?" Cassius Warrington asked, leaning back in his chair with raised eyebrows. Harry perched on the edge of the teacher's desk, surveying the group. "Partly, I just wanted to check in and see how everyone was doing. I know a lot of you were at the Cup, but mostly, I had an idea and I was wondering if you would be willing to help me." 11 faces stared back at him expectantly. "Voldemort is coming back," he declared. A few gasps echoed around the room. "Don't ask me how I know. Just call it special boy who lived sense." He tapped at his scar pointedly, hoping that would suffice as an explanation. He couldn't exactly tell them he'd seen Professor Snape's dark mark growing clearer, or that he'd watched Peter Pettigrew escape while Professor Trelawney had predicted he would aid Voldemort in returning to power. They'd think he was bonkers. "I don't know how long it'll take, but it's coming. We can't afford to wait until we're all of age to start making changes." "What do you want us to do? March into the Wizengamot and demand our seats early?" Sullivan Fawley scoffed. Harry shook his head. No, that won't work. I had something a little more simple in mind." Harry said, "Dumbledore is counting on house rivalries to keep people isolated, not just with the Slytherins. If everyone sticks to their own house, they become narrow-minded, unable to see anyone else's perspective. Those who need help often hesitate to ask for it, because it means reaching out to someone outside their house. If people keep labeling Slytherins as dark wizards, it's no wonder some of them might eventually embrace that path. I was thinking, since the theme this year seems to be international magical cooperation and unity, we could start building that connection a little closer to home." Padma frowned thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm not entirely sure yet. I definitely want to spend more time with all of you, but it can't just be me. If Dumbledore suspects I'm up to something, he'll start pushing. He has a lot riding on me being the good little Gryffindor golden boy." He hadn't mentioned the compulsion charm, but anyone could see that Dumbledore's treatment of him was far from a normal headmaster-student relationship. If all of you start hanging out with people from other houses, it doesn't even have to be the ones in this room, it could be anyone, then when I begin doing it, it won't seem as out of place, I hope. "What about a study group?" Hannah suggested. "We could form a smaller, private group, just us, meeting every other week or so to make plans. Then, outside of that, we could host a larger group, open to any house and any year. We could say that with the tournament disrupting the school year so much, we want to ensure we don't fall behind in our classes. I bet a bunch of 5th and 7th years would be interested too. They've got exams they won't want to fail. That way, it doesn't have to come directly from you, Harry." "Hannah, that's brilliant," Harry said, his excitement palpable. "It wouldn't even have to involve everyone meeting up all at once. They could gather based on year and subject, getting everyone involved. Studying the same thing together is a great way to find common ground," Harry said, a hint of enthusiasm in his voice. "If there's one thing that unites people, it's complaining about homework." "I'll talk to some of the other prefects," Cassius volunteered. "It might be a bit early to start, though. Term has just begun, and the tournament hasn't even kicked off yet. Plus, half the 6th and 7th years are planning to enter, so they're pretty preoccupied. But we can start branching out our friendship groups in preparation." "What about the rest of the Slytherins?" Ernie asked, raising his hands defensively when Daphne shot him a glare. "I mean, obviously you three are all right, but how do we know who else we can trust? We have no idea who might already be on you-know-whose side." "Do you really think any school kid can be on his side?" Harry pointed out with a wry smile. "Even if they think they are, they have no clue what war is really like. I'm not saying we should go out and hug every Slytherin, but we shouldn't treat them any differently than we would a Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, or Hufflepuff. If we automatically dismiss them just because of their house, we're no better than Dumbledore." "How many Slytherins could we save just by reaching out in friendship?" Harry continued, recalling what he'd learned from Remus and Sirius over the summer. Everyone assumed the Slytherin kids were lost to darkness the moment they were sorted into the house. That's how Voldemort ended up with such a massive following. They had nowhere else to turn. "So that's your grand plan?" Blaise asked, raising an eyebrow. "Friendship? You do realize you couldn't sound more Gryffindor if you tried." Harry grinned at him. "That's exactly why it's perfect. Dumbledore wouldn't dare get angry about all his students being friends. He'd have to face some serious questions if he did. Think about it," he continued. "All the school-sanctioned clubs are single house only. Quidditch, teams, study groups, heck, even the Gobstones Club is divided by house. It's like they don't want us interacting with each other. Shouldn't they encourage inter-house unity? We're all supposed to work together once we leave Hogwarts, after all." The only real attempt at inter-house cooperation was pairing students for classes, but even then it often felt like one house stuck to one side of the room while the other remained on the opposite end. "It is a bit weird," Parvati agreed. "Even when Padma and I got sorted into different houses, people acted like I was supposed to just stop talking to her. She's my twin sister." "So we make friends then," Susan declared confidently. "And when the time is right, we start our study group." "We can start small," Neville suggested, a little hesitant as every eye in the room turned to him. "Like asking to borrow a quill or complimenting someone's hair. Being nice to Slytherins. It'll look odd if we all suddenly want to be best friends with people outside our houses." "Neville's got a point," Harry agreed. "We don't want to look suspicious." "I hope you're not expecting me to be nice to people, Potter," Daphne drawled, a smirk playing on her lips. Harry snorted. "Wouldn't dream of it. Just be a bit unpleasant to everyone equally, and you'll be fine." That made Daphne laugh. After a summer of writing letters to the Slytherin girl, Harry felt he had a good grasp of her particular brand of humour. "If we're starting a study group, can we start now?" Sullivan asked, glancing around at the group. "You've all done third-year Transfiguration. This essay on mammal transformations is driving me crazy." It turned out many of them had brought their books, having come straight from lessons, and it was an easy transition into working together. Most of them were fourth years, after all. Cassius, the only sixth year in the group, was relieved when he admitted he had herbology homework, and Neville jumped at the chance to help with the advanced work. Harry smiled as he watched them collaborate. His shy Gryffindor friend was slowly gaining confidence as he explained concepts to Cassius, who took diligent notes. Maybe it wouldn't be so hard after all. Hedwig was a smarter owl than Harry had given her credit for. Instead of swooping in at breakfast with the rest of the Morning Post, she waited patiently at Harry's dorm window, a letter securely attached to her leg. When Harry found her, he was alone, no need to concoct an excuse to hide the letter from Ron and Hermione, as if they had any right to read his mail. He unfolded the parchment and quickly scanned the neat cursive handwriting of the goblin. "Dear Mr. Potter, the news of your scar is troubling. I will set my best team on the matter and inform you if we have any results. However, this is unlike any prior curse-breaking we have encountered in recent memory. It may not be something we can assist with. The issue regarding your vault is more straightforward. I have made arrangements with Farlig to upgrade your vault security. No one will be allowed access without you present, unless you have granted prior in-person permission that can be verified by magical signature. If certain individuals inquire, we will excuse it as standard security changes. I have also enclosed a list of vault transactions from the last 14 years. If any of these are unauthorized or unwelcome, we are happy to take recompense from the offender's personal vaults. You are also within your rights to demand the return of any items removed from your vaults. May your vaults be ever full. Gorak Sr., Inheritance Manager, Gringotts Bank." There was a second piece of parchment folded beside the first. Harry opened it, his heart sinking with every line he read. The most recent transactions were listed first, and Harry's name appeared next to nearly all of them. However, several entries didn't add up. One was a withdrawal of 30 galleons made by Molly Weasley this summer. She hadn't bought anything for Harry. Why was she taking money from his vault? The further Harry read back, the more questions he had. Harry's mind raced as he reviewed the transactions. There had been a handful of withdrawals from Molly Weasley over the past 3 years, each one far more than she could have possibly spent on his school supplies. They weren't enormous amounts, but certainly unnecessary. Then there were the withdrawals from Dumbledore, regular transactions for sums much larger than anything Molly had taken. It seemed he had also taken several Potter family heirlooms, books, jewellery, art, an entire assortment. The records went all the way back to November 1981, just weeks after Harry's parents had died. Even if Dumbledore had been sending some sort of stipend to the Dursleys for caring for Harry, which he knew from their constant complaints he hadn't, it didn't justify taking the heirlooms. It didn't excuse the withdrawals during the school year when the Dursleys didn't even have him. Harry had expected to find something amiss, but the realization made him feel sick. Dumbledore had been stealing from him since he was a baby, the very man who was supposed to be responsible for his safety and welfare. And as for Mrs. Weasley, he couldn't bring himself to believe it was as it appeared. Surely there had to be another explanation. Perhaps his school supplies had cost more than he thought. Surely she wouldn't steal from him. Didn't she know he would gladly share whatever he had with her family if they needed it? He quickly penned a reply to Gorak, instructing him to keep the transaction list in the same place as the magical signature, but not to take any action just yet. If he started reclaiming items from Dumbledore now, it would raise suspicions. The thought of his family's belongings in the hands of that manipulative old man infuriated him, but there was little he could do at the moment. At least the new security measures would prevent Dumbledore from taking anything else. As for the issue with Mrs. Weasley, Harry couldn't bring himself to address it. The thought of her possibly being aligned with Dumbledore made him anxious. If she was working for him, how many of her children were involved? Mr. Weasley? Could he trust any of them? He told himself he could trust the twins. They had known about his investigation into his heritage for a whole year and hadn't breathed a word to anyone. As for the rest, he would find out in time. He decided to block access to his vaults and see what happened. There wasn't much else he could do for now. Harry had changed his opinion of Professor Moody. The man wasn't just difficult, he was downright insane. Everyone else seemed to be in awe of his teaching style, but as Harry left the classroom with green light burned into his eyelids and saw Neville pale and trembling, he couldn't condone the man's methods. At least Moody had confirmed they would only have to endure him for 1 year. Around them, classmates buzzed about the lesson like it had been some kind of thrilling performance. Even Ron couldn't stop raving about how the spider had died just like that. Harry pushed past him, hurrying after Neville, and slung an arm around the taller boy's shoulders. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Neville's eyes looked glazed, as if he wasn't really there. "I think I might be sick," Neville admitted in a whisper. Harry guided him to a nearby alcove, nudging him into a sitting position. "Breathe, Nev." Over the summer, Harry had learned a lot about Neville, including the tragedy surrounding his parents. He could hardly fathom what it must be like to have them alive, yet unable to recognize him or anyone else, their minds shattered by relentless torture. From Moody's words, they would be studying the unforgivables extensively next term. Harry wished it would be worthwhile to go to Dumbledore about it. The man had likely agreed to let 14-year-olds learn about the worst curses known to wizard kind, curses that had devastated families like Neville's. Suddenly, An odd clunking sound caught Harry's attention, and he turned to see Moody walking toward them. He scowled at the professor. "It's all right, Sonny," Moody assured, clapping Neville on the shoulder. "Why don't you come up to my office and have a cup of tea?" He glanced over at Harry. "You all right there, Potter?" "I've been better," Harry replied tersely. "I know it seems a little harsh, but you've got to know. No point in pretending. Anyway, come on, Longbottom. I've got some books that might interest you." Neville shot Harry a pleading look, and Harry gently grabbed him by the arm. "Actually, Professor, Neville and I were going to finish our charms essays before dinner, if you don't mind." He tried to stay polite, aware that Moody was still a teacher, but he was reaching the end of his tether. The vision of the green flash lingered every time he closed his eyes. Moody stared him down for a moment, then nodded and stepped back. "If you're sure, Potter. You boys watch yourselves. Constant vigilance." With that, he limped back to his office, and Neville let out a shaky breath. "Thanks, Harry," he murmured. I can't right now, not after seeing him do that. You know what they say about the unforgivables. For them to work, you've got to mean it." Harry swallowed hard. Moody certainly meant it back in the classroom with the spiders. Had the aura used those curses on people before, too? Surely even auras weren't allowed to use that kind of force. What was that about, then? Ron and Hermione suddenly appeared, as if they hadn't gone back to the tower like Harry thought. Ron seemed entirely oblivious to the tension in the air. Some lesson, eh? He really knows his stuff. The way that spider just snuffed it, wow, He quickly fell silent as he realized who he was talking to. Harry's patience snapped. "Just leave it, Ron," he muttered, putting an arm around Neville and heading for the door. Harry felt out of place in Gryffindor Tower and decided to avoid it for a while. Eventually, he and Neville ran out of excuses to stay away from the common room, so they reluctantly headed back. As they entered, Harry spotted Hermione and Ron in a corner. Hermione was animatedly holding what looked like a collection box, speaking rapidly, while Ron appeared to wish he were anywhere else. His mood brightened when he saw Harry, seemingly having forgotten that Harry was upset with him. "Great! Harry! Hermione, you can tell Harry all about S.P.E.W. Look! It's S.P.E.W, Hermione corrected, but Ron had already vaulted over the back of the armchair and headed up to the dormitory. Harry exchanged a puzzled glance with Neville. "What's in the box, Hermione?" he asked, already sensing he might regret it. Hermione launched into a passionate tirade about house elf rights, and Harry quickly reached his limit. "Hermione," he interrupted, "have you ever actually spoken to a house elf?" "Well, no, but did you do any research at all into the specifics of a house elf's bond with its family?" Harry pressed on. Hermione hesitated. "It's really hard to find information on it in the library," she admitted. "House elves get sick if they're not bonded to a house," Neville chimed in, looking bewildered. "I thought everyone knew that." "They what?" Hermione's eyes widened in surprise. "Their magic needs the bond to balance it. Without access to the family magic that comes from being bonded to a house, the elf's magic becomes unstable and starts turning inwards. It's awful to watch, I've heard. Back in the old days, they could survive in the wild on the natural magic in the forests, but then the muggles started chopping them all down. That's when the house elves began bonding themselves to wizard families instead," Neville explained. Harry was willing to bet that a family like the Longbottoms had at least 2 house elves. According to Sirius, the Black family had 1 at every property, and the Potter family had 2 at their ancestral home, plus a few others scattered about. Harry wasn't old enough to claim the Potter properties or the house elves just yet, but he knew that day would come. Well, that doesn't excuse them from not being paid. If anything, it makes it worse. They can't leave, so they're forced to do all the work, he argued. House elves like doing work, Neville replied. Our elf, Hetty, was devastated when I decided to tend the greenhouse myself. Maybe you should do a little more research before jumping in where you're not needed, Hermione, Harry suggested gently, his heart going out to her. She was just trying to do the right thing. By all means, focus on laws to ensure house elves are treated better by their owners, but don't assume what they want without even talking to them. He ran a hand through his hair, wincing at the brewing headache. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to bed. It's been a hell of a day. I'll head up too, Neville said quickly, clearly not wanting to be left alone with Hermione after that minor explosion. As they climbed the stairs, he placed a hand on Harry's arm. Are you sure you're all right? Seeing that curse in Moody's class couldn't have been any easier for you than it was for me. His eyes held understanding, and Harry sighed. At that moment, all he really wanted was a hug. He felt a twinge of resentment towards Sirius and Remus for getting him so accustomed to seeking comfort over the summer. That comfort was gone now. I just want to sleep, he admitted, dragging a hand over his face. Yet, when he finally settled into bed, curtains drawn, he found himself staring up at the ceiling of his four-poster, wide awake. Chapter 20. Harry should have known that Ron and Hermione wouldn't remain oblivious forever. As he strolled into the common room after a brief meeting with Draco, one of their rare pre-curfew encounters, he was surprised to find Ron and Hermione sitting on the sofa by the fire. Hermione wasn't doing homework, which was a novelty in itself. "Where have you been?" she asked, her tone suspicious. Harry shrugged. "Library," he replied, offering his usual excuse for his absences. Whether it was a meeting with Draco or the other heirs, they had started their own study group early in the year. It turned out there were quite a few intelligent people in the group, and between them they covered just about every subject. Sullivan had even mentioned that his grades had never been better. "No, you weren't. I was in the library and I didn't see you there," Hermione countered. Harry bit back a sigh. "It's a big library, Hermione, but I was there, and then I finished my potions essay, so I went for a walk, if you must know." He sank into the armchair, dropping his bag on the floor. "What does it matter where I was, anyway?" "You're always disappearing on us these days, mate," Ron accused. "Feels like we barely see you anymore." He wasn't wrong, but Harry didn't feel entirely bad about it. There were so many parts of his life he couldn't share with them, and honestly, many he didn't want to. If he'd tried hard enough, he could have told them about his inter-house study group without mentioning that they were heirs. Hermione was oblivious to all that politics, and Ron actively disliked anything that might give him something in common with Malfoy, so he wasn't knowledgeable enough to piece it together either. But Harry enjoyed having people in his life who weren't them. Ron and Hermione wanted to know everything. He recalled his first 2 years at school, when they acted as if it was a personal offense if he didn't share every secret. He had gone along with it because he didn't know how else to navigate their friendship. Harry couldn't help but feel frustrated by how his friends were prying into his personal life. They constantly asked if he'd heard from Sirius, as if it was any of their business. He was relieved they had no idea about the troubling dream he'd had over the summer. And there was that nagging voice in the back of his mind, whispering that he couldn't fully trust them, that they were more loyal to Dumbledore than to him. That voice had never been wrong. "I just like having a little time to myself these days, that's all," he replied. "Hermione was wondering if you've got a girlfriend you're not telling us about," Ron teased, wiggling his eyebrows at Harry. Harry felt his face go bright red. "What? Why would you say that? I don't have a girlfriend," he sputtered. Ron laughed. Exactly, that's what I said. I told her you'd tell us if you did. Not if she's someone he thinks we wouldn't approve of, Hermione chimed in, giving Harry a sympathetic look. If you do, you can tell us. We won't judge you, Harry. So many thoughts raced through Harry's mind. I've been hanging out with Slytherins. I like boys. I think I have a crush on Draco Malfoy. He doubted they'd be so accepting of that. Instead, he shook his head stubbornly. I don't have a secret girlfriend, he promised. Hermione, did you really think someone could date Harry Potter and keep it a secret? Ron pointed out with a chuckle. She'd be all over the school with the news. Harry grimaced. Whether it was a girl or a boy, he'd never date anyone who was thrilled by his fame. Surely they understood that. If I ever get a girlfriend, you two will be the first to know, he said, confident that would never happen. He was pretty sure that girls just weren't his thing. Still, the blonde Slytherin who seemed to occupy far too much of his thoughts made it hard to ignore. He tuned out Ron and Hermione as they bickered about what kind of girl he might date, and instead grabbed one of the Muggle fiction books from his bag. Remus had taken Harry out of his bag and settled in to read, but it was hard for Harry to focus. So much was swirling around in his mind. When had his friendship with Ron and Hermione changed so dramatically that he felt like they hardly knew him anymore? And why was he still trying? As soon as the bell rang, Harry stormed out of Moody's classroom, walking too fast for anyone to catch up with him. His knees ached from slamming into the desk multiple times, and his hands shook uncontrollably. How could Dumbledore approve of this? Putting underage kids under the Imperious Curse was outrageous. No matter the justification of wanting them to know what it felt like, it was wildly illegal. They should have at least been given a consent form for their guardians to sign. He was furious, in pain, and his head still felt foggy from being imperioused multiple times. He didn't even know where he was going, as long as it was away from there. That's why he was utterly baffled to find himself standing in the dungeons, right outside Snape's office. He bit his lip. Sirius and Remus had said he could go to Snape if he was having problems during the school year. Surprisingly, Snape had been fairly decent to him in potions class so far. Gathering his courage, Harry knocked cautiously on the door. "Enter," came the curt response. Harry eased the door open, noticing Snape's eyebrows rise at his unexpected arrival. "Potter," Snape said, his tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. Harry opened his mouth to speak, but Snape raised a hand, lifting his wand and performing several warding charms. Only then did he lower his hand and gesture for Harry to continue. "Do you know what Professor Moody is doing in his classes, sir?" "I know he recently performed all 3 unforgivables," Snape replied, curling his lip in disdain. "I do not know if anything more recent has occurred." "He's putting us under the Imperious Curse," Harry said, his voice trembling slightly. Snape dropped his quill, clearly intrigued. "He says Dumbledore wants us to know how it feels so we can learn to fight it." Snape rubbed the bridge of his nose with his long-fingered hand, letting out a frustrated sigh. "Of course he does," he muttered derisively. "Potter, you're shaking." He quickly rose to his feet and urged Harry into the chair opposite his desk. "I almost threw it off the first time," Harry admitted. "Professor Moody put me under it another 4 times until I could ignore his orders completely." A few moments later, Snape thrust a vial of pepper-up potion toward him. 5 Imperious Curses in half an hour? You're lucky you can still form sentences, he said. What the hell is he playing at? Dumbledore's golden boy is no good to him with his brain leaking out of his ears. After taking the potion, Harry immediately felt better. No one else in the class was able to throw it off. I think he just wanted to get the better of me. I told Albus it was a foolish idea to bring that madman out of retirement, Snape replied. He's had one too many curses to the head. What am I supposed to do? Harry asked, feeling helpless. I can't go to Dumbledore because it was his idea. But I can't tell anyone else, or it'll be obvious to Dumbledore that I'm not obeying him anymore. A sudden thought struck him, and he froze. Will he know I got rid of the compulsion charm, since I was able to shake off the Imperius? Snape considered this. If anything, this probably works in our favor. He'll believe his compulsion charm is so strong that it even overrode Moody's Imperius, he assured Harry. But I agree, you can't say anything about it. He pursed his lips, silent for a moment. I'm sorry to say, Potter, but I think you're going to have to keep at it. With any luck, once you can throw off the curse every time, Moody will get bored and move on. And it is a good skill to have, even if your methods are questionable. Snape took the empty vial from Harry's trembling fingers and set it aside. Just be careful. Repeated short-term exposure to the Imperius curse can be dangerous. I want you to come to me if you feel any unusual symptoms, or if he puts you under more than 3 times in a row again. Yes, sir. Harry bit his lip. Not Madame Pomfrey. Snape frowned at the suggestion. Until I have determined who on the staff is under Dumbledore's thumb, I think it's best we keep this to ourselves. Regardless of Poppy's loyalties, I don't like the idea of you spending any length of time in the hospital wing. It's much easier for the headmaster to access you there, with plenty of privacy in case he decides you need a little more magical control. The thought of Dumbledore cursing him while he slept made Harry feel sick to his stomach. Going a whole school year without a trip to the hospital wing is going to be a tall order, sir, he remarked with a weak laugh. Snape's lips quirked slightly. I gave you those potions for a reason, Potter, and if you need assistance, you can always come to me. I assume that map of yours will show you the way to my private quarters? Harry nodded. Then you have permission, in an emergency, to come to me there if needed. Don't abuse that permission, Potter. I won't, Harry promised, meaning it. Snape was on their side. Like Sirius had said, he was basically family now. Harry didn't want to do anything to upset the truce they seemed to have reached. I want you to sit there for 20 minutes, Snape instructed. Read if you must, but I need to make sure you aren't going to have any aftershocks. You can leave when it's time for dinner. Yes, sir. Harry dug through his bag for his book, but instead of opening it, he leaned back in the chair and let his eyes fall shut. If anyone had told him last year that he'd feel so... If someone had told Harry he'd find himself relaxed in Snape's office, he would have laughed himself sick. Yet it was so nice to be somewhere quiet, somewhere no one expected anything from him or demanded answers. It reminded him a little of the refuge he'd found at Serendu. He really missed that place. It was going to be a long, long school year. Once the announcement about the arrival of the foreign schools went out, it became the talk of the castle. Even Draco, when he and Harry met up a few nights before Halloween, mentioned the 2 French girls he'd met over the summer, lamenting that they wouldn't be coming since they were still underage. Harry couldn't muster any sadness about it. Finally, everyone gathered in the entrance hall, which sparkled after its recent makeover. This way, outside, stay in line, McGonagall instructed, fussing and scolding until all the Gryffindors were lined up neatly by year group outside the school. The other houses were organized in the same manner, their heads of houses ensuring everyone stayed in line. They waited. Harry felt a reluctant sense of admiration as the delegations arrived. Mostly he was just grateful for the warming charms Remus had put on his school cloak before he packed it. When the students emerged from both the carriage and the ship, they began to head back inside, until the Durmstrang delegation came close enough for everyone to see their famous member. "Victor Crumb!" The whisper echoed through the crowd of students. Harry noticed Crumb duck his head and press on, resolutely ignoring the squeals and murmurs that followed him. Harry could sympathize with that. "Harry, it's Crumb!" Ron hissed, as if Harry might have missed it. "For heaven's sake, Ron, he's just a Quidditch player," Hermione said, rolling her eyes. Ron looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Harry rolled his eyes too, as they slipped into a quiet bickering. He jogged a couple of steps forward until he found himself between Neville and Parvati. Parvati was still starry-eyed, but she... "Wow, I knew he was young, but I had no idea he was still in school." Harry shrugged. "Imagine trying to keep up your grades alongside a professional Quidditch career." They settled at their house tables, eagerly awaiting the foreign students to choose their places. The Beauxbatons students opted for the Ravenclaw table, while the Durmstrang delegation, led by Victor Crumb, made their way to the Slytherin table. Harry found it amusing to watch Draco trying to play it cool with Crumb sitting right next to him, while Ron quietly simmered with frustration. Curiously, Harry studied the foreign delegations. Each school had sent only students of age, so there were about 15 from each. Beauxbaton had a balanced mix of boys and girls, but he noticed only 2 girls in the Durmstrang group. As Dumbledore stood at the podium, a hush fell over the room. He greeted their guests and declared the feast open. Harry was pleasantly surprised by the variety of foreign dishes on offer. The house elves had truly outdone themselves. "Oh, you should try this, boys," Parvati urged, pointing to a large pot filled with stew. "It's Giuvek. I had it in Bulgaria once with my family. It's delicious." Harry exchanged a glance with Neville, then shrugged as they each spooned some stew onto their plates. After all, the tournament was all about cultural sharing. A little further down the table, Ron finally seemed to notice that Harry wasn't sitting with them. Unfortunately, though perhaps fortunately, depending on how you looked at it, he was quickly distracted by a stunning blonde French girl who approached to take one of the dishes. Ron was completely tongue-tied, while Hermione, exasperated, gestured for the girl to take the bowl, shooting a glare at Ron. Harry couldn't help but notice several other boys staring at the blonde as she... Harry walked back to the Ravenclaw table, where Neville leaned over and asked, "Do you think she's part Veela or something?" His eyes followed the beautiful girl, curiosity evident on his face. Harry raised an eyebrow. She could be. That would certainly explain why all the boys were staring. Did Veela not affect women? "Oi, Harry, there's room for you up here," Ron called out as dessert appeared, gesturing to the empty seat beside him, the one he'd cleared for Victor Crumb. "I'm all right, thanks, Ron," Harry replied, waving him off as he helped himself to a slice of cake. Neville snorted at the outraged look on Ron's face. "The golden trio isn't so golden anymore, is it?" he murmured knowingly. Harry shrugged. "My priorities are different now. Theirs aren't quite matching up." He was hoping to avoid the inevitable confrontation when they realized he was mostly steering clear of them. He felt suffocated around them, especially Ron. But if that friendship fractured, he couldn't guarantee which side Hermione would take. Once the plates were cleared, Dumbledore stood again, and Harry noticed that the 2 empty chairs at the staff table had been filled. When had Bagman and Crouch arrived? Filch then brought in a massive casket, revealing the Goblet of Fire, a truly impressive object. Harry should have guessed that the impartial judge was a magical artifact. Wizards had a knack for giving decision-making power to inanimate objects. As everyone gathered to head up to their common rooms, Harry found himself flanked by Ron and Hermione once more, though the twins quickly nudged them aside. "An age line," Fred exclaimed. "That's easy to fool. Once our names are in the goblet, we're golden." "How about it, Harry? You sure you don't want to try for it?" George asked eagerly. Harry laughed and shook his head. "Nah, it's not for me. But good luck with that." He doubted something as simple as an aging potion would fool the line, but then again it was... Dumbledore always seemed to encourage a bit of reckless rule-breaking. As Harry reached the entrance hall, he encountered a group of Durmstrang students alongside their headmaster, Karkaroff. He stepped back, hoping to avoid Karkaroff's gaze, but it was too late. The man was already staring at him. Harry tried to maintain his composure. Snape had warned him about Karkaroff, a former Death Eater and a slippery character at that. Karkaroff's eyes locked onto Harry's scar, while his students whispered among themselves, realizing who he was. The only one not staring was Victor Crumb. "If you don't mind, Igor," Snape's voice cut through the murmurs. "Potter's ego is big enough as it is without foreigners gawking at him. His head may not fit through the door if you keep at it much longer." Karkaroff seemed to notice the crowd he had drawn and cleared his throat, moving through the doorway. Harry shot Snape a grateful look, but Snape remained unfazed. And so it began. Harry couldn't shake the feeling that the day the names would be drawn from the goblet also happened to be Halloween. He woke up with a knot of anxiety in his stomach and quietly slipped out of the dormitory before anyone else stirred. He wore a dark blue knitted jumper that still carried the faint scent of Kerry's detergent from Serendu, along with the cloak he had received for his birthday. As he pocketed the two-way mirror, a plan began to form in his mind. Even with the excitement surrounding the Goblet of Fire, Harry arrived early enough that only a few people were milling about the Great Hall. It was peaceful, and he found he quite liked having breakfast in the quiet. He watched as Cassius and a couple of other Slytherins tossed their names into the flames, a smirk creeping onto his face. Imagine if the Hogwarts champion turned out to be a Slytherin. As the day unfolded, Harry felt a mix of anticipation and dread. As Harry finished off his porridge, he noticed the Durmstrang delegation entering the hall, each holding a piece of parchment. He lingered in the doorway, watching as they stepped forward one by one to drop their names into the Goblet of Fire. Once they were inside, he slipped out of the castle and made his way toward the lake, wrapping his cloak snugly around himself. Finding a quiet nook beside a tree near the water's edge, he set up his usual privacy charms. With a deep breath, he took the mirror from his pocket and called out Sirius's name. After a moment, his godfather's face appeared. "You're up early," Sirius greeted, a hint of surprise in his voice. Harry offered a half smile. "So are you." "It's one of those days," Sirius replied, a knowing look in his eyes. "How are things at school? The champions are being announced tonight, right?" Harry filled Sirius in on everything that had happened since their last conversation, including his encounter with Karkaroff. The mention of the Durmstrang headmaster made Sirius scowl. "Stay away from him if you can, Harry," he warned. "He's no good." Harry had already figured that much out. "How are things at home? What are you up to today?" "Just spending time with Moody. We're going to light a Samhain fire later. Today is hard for both of us." Neither of them needed to elaborate. The shadow of Lily and James Potter's death loomed over them, the pain still raw after 13 years.
I wish I could be there with you, Harry sighed. He hated spending Halloween at school. The cheerful atmosphere felt wrong, and something always seemed to go awry. We wish you could be here too, pup.
Just make sure someone gives you a hug today, all right? For me. I'd tell you to go to Severus for one, but I think he might explode if you asked, Sirius joked, eliciting a grin from Harry. Okay, you give Moody an extra hug for me, won't you? For both your sakes. One day, they all hoped to be together, honoring the memories they cherished. Harry knew he probably wouldn't see Sirius again until after he graduated from Hogwarts, but it was a comforting thought. He chatted with Sirius about inconsequential things, relishing the warmth that came from having an adult who genuinely cared about the little details of his life. It felt good to have someone who wasn't just interested in him when he was in trouble or needed something. One of the few adults who truly cared about Harry, not just the boy who lived. Eventually, though, Sirius had to leave, and Harry pocketed the mirror with a sigh, gazing out over the lake. What if he just sat there all day until the feast? What if he skipped it altogether? He could find out who the champions were in the morning. Truthfully, he didn't care either way. He let his privacy charms fade, allowing the soothing sounds of nature to wash over him, the gentle lapping of the lake's tide, the birds and other creatures chattering in the forest. He could faintly hear the noise of students up at the castle, but it was distant enough that he could pretend they didn't exist. That was until someone cleared their throat. "Mind if I join you?" It was Draco, his pale face partially obscured by his Slytherin scarf. Harry shuffled over a bit to make room for the blonde. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "Pansy wanted to get a better look at Crumb," Draco explained. "I left her to it. Are you okay? You look sad." "Just spoke to Sirius." Harry bit his lip, then sighed as he met Draco's gaze earnestly. "I miss him. Especially today." "Today? Oh." Draco quickly connected the dots. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "It must be hard for you, seeing everyone else so happy." "It's not just that," Harry replied. "It's something bad always happens on Halloween. Every year. I feel like this year won't be any different, and I'm so sick of it all. I just want today to be over already." His heart ached, the weight of the day pressing down on him. His head hurt, and he was already exhausted. The day had barely begun, and he was ready for it to be over. If it makes you feel better, the Weasley twins tried to put their names in the goblet. The age line spat them back out with beards longer and greyer than Dumbledore's, Draco said, a slight smile creeping onto his face. It was hilarious. "I guess they're serious about keeping anyone underage out." Harry chuckled. "I wish I'd seen that." He felt a twinge of sympathy for the twins, but honestly he was relieved they wouldn't be putting themselves in danger for a shot at money and glory. The two sat in silence for a while, Draco's shoulder warm against his, as they watched the giant squid curiously prod the Durmstrang ship. "At least tomorrow all the fuss will be over," Draco murmured. "The champions will be chosen, and the rest of us can just get on with things until the first task." Yeah, Harry wished the tournament was the least of his concerns. "Draco, I don't know what to do. I can't let Dumbledore know I'm onto him, but I can't keep pretending I'm oblivious. It's killing me. Trying to act like Ron's comments about Slytherins don't bother me, that Hermione's nagging isn't overbearing. I can't even hang out with Neville without them getting suspicious, let alone anyone else." Other heirs were starting to build inter-house friendships, but Harry still felt trapped. "Sometimes I just want to say forget it and sit with you at the Slytherin table. Let the pieces fall where they may. What does it matter if Dumbledore knows I've messed up his plan? He's going to find out eventually. Antagonizing Dumbledore is a dangerous game, Draco warned. He's more manipulative than any Slytherin, and sneaky about it. If you go against him openly, without the proper precautions, you could end up expelled, or worse. Being the boy who lived won't protect you from that. I know, Harry said with a groan. I know I can't. It just feels like I'm letting him win. If you were letting him win, you wouldn't be sitting here talking to me, Draco pointed out. Not every battle has to be a big Gryffindor confrontation, you know. You keep telling me you have a Slytherin side. Let that out to play for a while. Work in the shadows. Be sneaky. He smirked. Beat him at his own game. Harry let the idea roll around in his head for a moment. He'd have to start slowly. I think I need to send some letters, he said eventually. I'm going to need allies outside of the castle as well as inside it. It was time to start revealing some of his secrets and find out who he could truly trust. He couldn't dismantle Dumbledore's grip on the wizarding world without help. He had been skirting around the edges, afraid that Dumbledore would find out and his plans would be ruined. But Draco was right. He had a Slytherin side, and it was time to use it. Right now? Draco asked, tensing. Harry shook his head. Later. He was far too comfortable to leave just yet. For now, I just need a bit more peace and quiet. Oh, I can go if you'd like. Harry rolled his eyes and tugged on Draco's hand before the blonde could get up. You don't count, you daft git, he said, cheeks flushing pink. It was definitely just because of the cold. Draco settled back down, his hand still in Harry's. Boldly, Harry leaned in closer, letting his head fall onto Draco's shoulder. I hate Halloween, he muttered under his breath. Draco's cheek tilted to press against Harry's hair, his body a warm line against Harry's. I'm sorry about your parents, he said softly. The two sat under the tree for almost half an hour, Harry's head resting on Draco's shoulder, breathing quietly in the crisp October morning. As they parted ways, Draco couldn't shake the worry that Pansy would be looking for him, while Harry had the same concern about Ron and Hermione. Although he still felt a knot in his stomach, there was a newfound calmness settling in. It wasn't quite the hug Sirius had suggested, but it would have to do. True to his word, Harry made his way to the owlery after saying goodbye to Draco. He called out for Hedwig, who swooped down gracefully. "Hello, girl," he said fondly, stroking her head. "Won't be a minute." In the corner of the owlery there was a writing desk. Harry pulled out a quill and some parchment from his bag, sitting down with a thoughtful frown. The first letter on his list was to Bill Weasley. Dear Bill, I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. You did say to keep in touch, after all. I expect the others have already told you about the tournament, but the champions are being chosen tonight. From what I heard, the twins tried to enter, but they didn't get past the age line. I was wondering something. Do you know a goblin named Gorak? I had some dealings with him the summer before third year, and I'd like to know how he's doing. What exactly does a curse breaker do? You mentioned bringing home treasure. Is your job mainly about raiding old Egyptian tombs, or do you ever break curses on people too? Hope you're doing well, Harry. There. That should give Bill enough to connect some dots. And if Bill was loyal to Dumbledore, he might mention it to the headmaster, which would alert Harry to the situation. If Dumbledore thought Harry was aware of the curse on him, he'd definitely start sniffing around. Grabbing another piece of parchment, Harry took a moment to gather his thoughts before starting the next letter. Dear Charlie, The secret is out. The tournament is almost underway. Are you planning to come watch some of it? Is that why you said you might see us sooner than expected? It's a shame the tournament means... Quidditch is cancelled, Ron said, disappointment evident in his voice. I was really looking forward to using some of the stuff I practiced this summer in a real match. I guess I'll have to wait until next year. Harry nodded, curious about Ron's thoughts. Is the ministry in Romania like the one here? The Durmstrang students are pretty quiet about where they're from and how things work. I wonder if all European wizarding communities are the same. Do they have a Wizengamot like we do? Are the seats inherited in the same way? No worries if you don't know. I just thought I'd ask. I've been looking into things like that a bit more here, and I'd love to see if it's much different elsewhere. Hope you're doing well, Harry, Ron added, not realizing how much Harry had been keeping to himself. As Harry sealed the letters and tied them to Hedwig's leg, he hoped both Bill and Charlie were still at the burrow. He didn't want to accidentally send her to Egypt or Romania. With a flap of her wings, she soared off into the horizon. Harry sighed, officially out of excuses for avoiding Ron and Hermione. He had other letters to write, but they could wait until Hedwig returned. He considered heading to the library, pretending to do homework until Hermione eventually found him, but it was no use. Halfway down the main staircase, he heard someone call his name. "There you are," Ron exclaimed, rushing towards him with Hermione beside him. "Mate, you missed it. Fred and George tried to put their names in, but the age line wasn't fooled by the potion. They ended up with these massive beards. It was brilliant." "Where were you?" Hermione asked. "Owlery," Harry replied, letting them think he was writing to Sirius. "Oh, well, we thought we'd go visit Hagrid. We haven't seen him yet this term," Ron said, his excitement palpable. Harry didn't really want to spend much time with Ron and Hermione today, but he couldn't think of a good excuse. He did owe Hagrid a visit after all, so he found himself stepping outside once more, this time heading toward the hut. The Beauxbatons carriage was parked nearby, clearly so Hagrid could keep a close eye on the enormous horses. Visiting with Hagrid felt just like old times, if a bit peculiar, especially with Hagrid dressed in his unusual suit. Everything became clear when they made their way to the castle for the feast, and the headmistress of Beauxbatons stepped out of her carriage. "We've lost him," Harry said, watching Hagrid stroll alongside the large woman, completely oblivious to his student companions. Hermione giggled, and the three of them continued up to the castle, which buzzed with excitement. They found a seat next to the twins, who looked no worse for wear after their experience with the age line. "I hope it's Angelina," Fred exclaimed, "but any Gryffindor will do." "As long as it's not Pretty Boy Diggory," Ron muttered under his breath. Harry rolled his eyes. It was the fastest Hogwarts feast ever. Everyone devoured their food, eager for the champions to be announced, while up at the head table, Dumbledore seemed to savor every bite. After what felt like an eternity, the plates were cleared, and he stood. Harry's heart raced, but he couldn't tell if it was excitement or dread. He'd been carrying a bad feeling all day, and now, with the champions about to be announced, his stomach churned with something less than anticipation. The first champion was Victor Crumb. A solid choice. If Crumb was as skilled at magic as he was at flying, he'd be a formidable contender. He'd already shown he could think on his feet. Next was Fleur Delacour, the girl who resembled a Veela. Harry knew nothing about her, but her schoolmates looked disappointed, though perhaps that was simply because they hadn't been chosen. When the Hogwarts champion was announced, the force of the noise from the Hufflepuff table nearly knocked Harry off his bench. Harry beamed, rising to his feet and applauding. "Nice one, Cedric," he called out, completely ignoring the scowl from Ron beside him. Cedric turned and flashed a grin as he made his way up. Harry felt a swell of pride. Hufflepuff deserved a moment of glory. As he sat back down, Harry finally allowed himself to relax, grinning as it took several minutes for the Hufflepuffs to quiet down enough for Dumbledore to speak. The champions had been chosen, and he had made it through another Halloween feast. But then the fire in the goblet flared red once more. Harry's heart dropped as the parchment shot into Dumbledore's hand. The hall fell into an eerie silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Dumbledore as he stared at the parchment. Then he looked up, his eyes locking onto Harry. Oh no. Harry Potter